Good morning, everyone. My name is Vladimir Radunović from Diplo. I'll be the host of today's event. Welcome to the launch of the Geneva Manual on Responsible Behavior in Cyberspace, an event organized by the Geneva Dialogue on Responsible Behavior in Cyberspace. This is a result of a couple of years' process, gathering a lot of different stakeholders around the world to come up with something as a guideline on how to implement cyber norms related to vulnerability disclosure and supply chain. A lot of buzzwords. We'll try to decode. Most of you here have actually been in one way or another involved with the Geneva Dialogue. The others will be in the future. But we have a lot of time to discuss among ourselves. The event should be interactive, so we hope you'll grab the mic from time to time and jump in with your thoughts and reflections. We also have Zoom connections, so we have some friends in Zoom. There'll be a hybrid meeting, and we expect to get some of the inputs from them. Let me start with the welcoming words, and at the beginning, I'll invite His Excellency Ambassador Benedikt Wechsler, Ambassador and Head of the Digital Division at the Swiss Federal Department of Foreign Affairs. Ambassador, floor is yours.
Thank you, Jovan. Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. So happy to see some familiar faces, but a lot of new faces. And also a warm welcome to the audience online. I'm very proud to stand here today and launch the Geneva Manual on Responsible Behavior in Cyberspace. Switzerland has been one of the first countries to adopt a comprehensive digital foreign policy. It stresses the importance and the huge uplifting potential of the digital world and its tools to humanity. But without security in the digital world, this potential translates into equally huge disastrous effects. These tools can create enormous damage to individuals, societies, governments, and economies in the world. They can even become weapons. In essence, our digital foreign policy would not be able to achieve its goals in the area of sustainability, prosperity, or human rights without more cybersecurity. In analogy to the railways in the industrial era, I think nobody would have continued to use trains if the security of the railway infrastructure would be still on the level of a Western movie. We wanted to make a decisive and targeted contribution to increase cybersecurity. That is a very Swiss and Geneva spirit and attitude. Pragmatic, but based on best practice. Rules-based, but also focused on tangible, useful results. That is why the Geneva Dialogue on Responsible Behavior in Cyberspace was established by the Swiss Ministry of Foreign Affairs a little more than 5 years ago. It is led by DiploFoundation, who could count also on the very valuable support of the Republican Canton of Geneva, the Center of Security Studies at ETH Zurich, the Center for Digital Trust at EPFL Lausanne, as well as two great companies, Swisscom and UBS. It is a truly multi-stakeholder collaboration that involves, next to the government of Switzerland, also top-notch science and business wisdom. Of course, I feel almost a little bit embarrassed to say this in front of this audience. Cyberspace doesn't know borders. An exercise limited to Switzerland would be like we wanted to solve a global problem in Swiss miniature in Ticino, Milide. Even though there's now a beautiful model of the Palais des Nations from Geneva. No, definitely not. The Geneva Dialogue is a global dialogue, building on Geneva's tradition of bringing the world together. Some 100 companies, organizations, institutions, and experts from all corners of the world, and more than 50 representatives and independent experts contributed to the drafting of the Geneva Manual. We are convinced that it will be an important contribution to ongoing multilateral processes such as the UN OEWG. And I don't have to spell the whole word, you know, there are many UN OEWGs, but we're talking about this one. The dialogue embodies the principle of shared responsibility. It provides answers how the existing cyber norms can be best implemented by the private sector, academia, civil society, and the technical community. This is a major contribution to international security and peace. But we're also modest. The world, and the digital world in particular, is so complex that we don't know all the answers. So the Geneva Dialogue investigates the consequences of agreed upon norms for relevant stakeholders. It makes agreement or disagreement on roles and responsibility transparent in the Geneva Manual, shows good practices, and inspires others to promote responsible behavior in cyberspace. In this inaugural edition of the manual, we wanted to be very focused on norms with the widest impact, like supply chain security and reporting ICT vulnerabilities. So in a nutshell, why do we think that the Geneva Manual is so relevant? Firstly, the diverse perspectives of non-state stakeholders emphasizes the importance of multi-stakeholder participation in the implementation of norms. Secondly, it offers an action-oriented approach to cyberstability. It explores the roles, responsibilities and actions, incentives and challenges for stakeholders to implement these norms. Thirdly, it addresses the implementation gap and promotes responsible behavior in cyberspace across the different stakeholders. And finally, the manual also documents the challenges in the implementation and assists policymakers to identify areas for the future discussion and work. That leads me to my final point. The Geneva Manual isn't a book that you can just put on your shelves in order to impress your visitors in the office or on the screen in a virtual meeting, though why not? No, on a more serious note, it's an invitation to all stakeholders to join us on this path to collect ideas, core challenges, opportunities, and good practices for relevant non-state stakeholders to implement existing norms and collectively help make cyberspace more secure and stable. The Geneva Manual, in the spirit of dialogue, remains open to online comments and suggestions at genevadialogue.ch and will be continuously updated to reflect the changes driven by the rapid development of technologies. Let me conclude, and it's always a little bit tricky to single out persons or institutions, but I think they have a great merit. I'd like to thank particularly Vladimir, Radunović, and Anastasiya Kazakova from Diplo, the core team with Melanie Kolbe-Guyot and Ahmad Ad from the Center for Digital Trust, Sophie Gomez from Roche Diagnostics, Silvan Schellenberger from UBS, Shan Seng Teo, which I learned now more easily is XC, from Ensign InfoSecurity, Maya Bund, and at least but not least, my dear colleague Serge Tro, who have done a great work, and they can really be proud of what they have achieved. And again, we feel very privileged and honored that we could count on the support of our world-class technical universities like the EPFL and ETHZ. A warm thank again also to the Republican Canton of Geneva for their continued support. And we are really very grateful for the substantial contribution by the corporate sponsors Swisscom and UBS. Finally, I would like to thank also all the participants who have sacrificed precious working hours along the whole process. And of course, we hope to be able to count on your collective support in the future. The Geneva Manual isn't an end of a process, but a start of a new journey. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Ambassador. I'll now invite Dr. Jovan Kurbalija, Director of DiploFoundation, Head of the Geneva Internet Platform. Jovan, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Vlada. Excellencies, dear colleagues. There is a bit of symbolism in this place. We are, those of you who are from Geneva, this is the name of the area is Paki, and we call it Upper Paki to sound a bit posh here. Diplo started with our first office here, and when we grow as an organization, they told us, oh, well, you have to move closer to the UN. Then now we are in one of those glass buildings, lovely buildings of the WMO. And you will be seeing this evening during our reception where we are with lovely view. Therefore, I invite you to join us. You won't regret that. But when we were discussing where to organize this event, we said, okay, let's return back to our roots, because this event has an element of this bottom-up bit of bazaar, knitting together different things. There were many meetings in glass buildings, and the cybersecurity discussion has been going for the 25 years. In September, on 30th September 1998, cybersecurity resolution was basically draft was submitted. And then you have all of these acronyms, UNGG, OEWG, and I'm not going to bother you with this long journey. Of course, 11 norms and the other things. But the problem has been how to bring these norms, sometimes highly relevant diplomatically, how to bring them from the glass building where you will be this evening to the reality of Paki, symbolically speaking, where things are happening. You have small bars, you have alternative scene, you have people making their small businesses and trying to find a way to advance their creativity, fortune, whatever. And this is a metaphor of the Geneva dialogue process. And I would say this is underlying, and I have to admit now on this point, and I would like to apologize to Vlada. When he came to me with the idea of Geneva dialogue, I said, oh, Vlada, why you're putting us into this? This is for the UN, for big systems. We are small, we have 3 persons in Geneva. Diplo is a very small organization. We cannot sustain meetings and engagement and the other things. And he told me, give me a chance. And obviously, we supported him. And in the process, he helped me to learn one thing, that first, it's famous African saying, if you want to move fast, you go alone. If you want to move far, you go with the others. And the more the process was moving, the more I was impressed. Obviously, you know Vlada, and what was mentioned by Benedikt also, Anastasiya and Serge, people with a lot of knowledge, but what matters, people with a lot of empathy, people who are ready to listen, who are ready to engage. And sometimes in schematic reality that we face these days, where everything has to be outcome, output, impacts, we forget very simple thing, which we can learn in this area of the Geneva: engagement, listening, respect, and finding wisdom, sometimes in unknown and unexpected places. This is for me how I'm apologizing for that discussion which we had 4 years ago. And then what this journey or this walk is about. It's about applying these abstract norms, diplomatic norms, which are important. We have to accept them to have the common understanding, to reality. To reality, applying them to the desks of the operators, of cybersecurity experts. We are not yet there, but we are making steps in that direction. And ultimately, bless you, and ultimately trying to basically build secure digital world. I'm currently involved in artificial intelligence discussions, informal, formal, and the other things, and I'm seeing the same challenge, and we will discuss in the afternoon that. How to bring this abstract discussion about extinction risk and other things to real reality of people who are programming algorithms and codes in their work. And maybe it's not on the first glance a big step, but in my view, it is a huge, huge step that Geneva Dialogue has done. We can create a report, generate things with AI, you know, these days these things are easy, but developing community and developing capacities, developing shared understanding, and having what I call it beer-to-beer network or coffee-to-coffee or tea-to-tea network, to pick up the phone and have on the other side somebody who will understand you across the continents, across the professional communities, it's fantastic. And that's basically my major take from this process. We'll be hearing today a lot about it, and I will just reflect on the last point. We have Geneva Manual. I found it very useful because it's not too long. It's to the point. These days, you know, you can generate narrative endlessly. You can have books. It's to the point. But what is also impressive methodologically, it is part of the process with Serge, Anastasiya, and Vlada introduced very smartly You develop thinking, you develop logic, you develop facts, and sometimes you have to have a closure. They put closure today. But as Benedikt indicated, this is a learning process. And that's methodology, I think, is the key. The process is moving, understanding is developing, new insights are developed, and from time to time you make a closure and say, okay, this is this version, and we continue with the process using online tools, games, as Vlada will be explaining. The only problem is that I'm carried away when I see such successes, not obvious successes, but sort of tacit and implicit successes like the Geneva dialogue, and then I'm in trouble with timekeepers. But let me then put my official hat and thank our core partners, definitely Ambassador Wechsler, Benedikt for supporting it, and Serge Droz, who was unique interlocutor and reducing lost in translation on different level, professional, institutional, administrative. And it's another fascinating aspect, that you have different communities coming with different sort of way of terminology, and Serge was fantastic in that. Canton of Geneva for their support of making this possible. Definitely our colleagues from EPFL, UBS and Swisscom. I know some of you. I'm looking forward to meet all of you on this journey and to be active participant in this journey. Now, I would like to invite you and our colleagues online. Apology for not this camera. Apology for not referring to you. We sometimes forget them because there is internal dynamics, which is probably more precious. I'm inviting you to have a creative discussion and to have fun, because ultimately I think we can do a very serious things by having some fun. We are sometimes too serious and we are sometimes not producing a lot of results. And this is the spirit of Geneva Dialogue, at least what Vlada told me. And we will have a fun, creative time and develop something interesting and useful, including this evening, Diplo evening, which will be time to relax a bit with a glass of wine and to meet other members of the team. Thank you very much to all who have been involved. And Vlada, I didn't follow the script that you gave to me, but sorry, I hope I didn't miss anything. Okay.
Thank you, Jovan. I know that you never follow the script, but that's fine. We should now have, through Zoom, but let me check if we have, Mr. Florian Schütz, Federal Cybersecurity Delegate and Head of National Cybersecurity Center. Florian, it's great to see you, even if online. Welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. Very sorry I can only join you online, but I'll do my best to make up for it. Thank you for taking time out of your busy day for this important topic. And I would like to talk a little bit about why the Geneva Dialogue is important. And I'm sure each and every one of you knows why it's important, but why is it as important as it is today? So let's step back a little bit and look at the history of how today's digital life became to be, because as a matter of fact, life is getting more and more digital, business is more and more digital, and so all the rules that we take for granted from the physical world need to somehow make it into the digital. But as I said, we didn't start here. Actually, the topic started a long time ago, and I would like to go back to show the importance of different groups and actually dialogue between different groups by going back to the late 60s, early 70s. And I'm not sure who knows, but one of the very important aspects why the internet became so popular is going back to the hippies. Why the hippies, you might ask? Well, in the late 60s, early 70s, Stuart Brand launched the Whole Earth catalog, which was at the beginning in print, but very quickly an online magazine, not in the very modern form that you have it today. It was purely text-based back then, but an online magazine to connect different groups of hippies living in remote areas. And this sense of community, this building of communities across borders, has been an important theme and an important and often neglected topic that the internet enabled until today. Of course, also other stakeholders quickly either already had or took interest in the internet. If we look at the origins of the internet, it was built as the ARPANET, a network that was in its initial purpose built to withstand a nuclear strike and still functions, still being able to carry messages from A to B by automatically selecting a path that still works. In the 90s, economy entered the scene with the first dot-com bubble, trying to use the internet to make business. This didn't go well in the beginning, but then, of course, provided the learnings where we ended up today, where we see new business model emerging. One example is the influencer communities, basically new marketing channels to sell products, which result that products get more noticed on a global scale than rather on a regional scale. And at the same time, also the challenges for governments increased. How can you actually promote the values that you have also in cyberspace, especially as most of the infrastructure of the internet is not owned by government. It is owned by private companies. It is owned by organizations. So this shows very clearly that different groups are important in a dialogue and need to be involved in discussion if we want to build a cyberspace that enables prosperity and growth. I will just touch on a couple of them. I think one very, very important community is the research communities. After all, the internet and computers were founded with research. And even today, there's a lot of research done on how to build more secure infrastructure, and how to actually enable this digital life in a way that the risk is acceptable. I think we have a very good example in Switzerland with our Swiss Federal Institutes of Technology, of whom EPFL is present today. But then also the private sector plays a very important role. For example, today with us is Swisscom, who operate a very, very important network, and not only for private use, but also for emergency services that depend on connectivity and also to enable functioning of different infrastructure. If these networks fail, it's not just some of the clients, but there are side effects and there are important consequences. At the same time, if we look at network structures, upstream traffic is often routed by volume and paid by volume. So that's why, for example, we don't really know if our communication takes a direct path from A to B, or whether it goes through different countries and then it touches different regions, and that makes the topic global. So even a company that has Swiss in the name needs to act and does act global, right? Then also it's important, in my opinion, to understand that quite often we talk about cyberspace as this one topic, but it has many facets. It's cross-cutting, and also different sectors, different industries has different needs. For example, today present we have UBS, and together with the financial sector and UBS, as a member there, we launched the Financial Sector Cybersecurity Center, which is sort of a small national cybersecurity center for the financial sector, but also driven by the financial sector, driven by their needs, but also providing the knowledge about dependencies of, for example, payment and transaction systems on different infrastructures, which allows us to better manage risk and also in time of crisis, better address them. Because yes, the National Cybersecurity Center knows very well how to deal with incidents, how to lead through incidents and provide threat intelligence, but we don't know the specifics of the financial sector. That's really what the financial sector knows. And then last but not least, I would like to turn a focus and a spotlight on communities that we often forget. For example, in May 1998, 7 members of the Boston-based Loft Heavy Industries, a hackerspace, as we would say today, had a congressional hearing. This was the first congressional hearing about cybersecurity in history. Yet still today, we often neglect the different hackerspace, different hacker groups. NGOs are very important. Like, for example, in Switzerland, we have Quad 9, the DNS resolver, that is very important for keeping the freedom of the internet and fighting censorship. There's the Internet Archive, there's the Electronic Frontier Foundation. And I think all of these players talking about norms, agreeing on norms that enable us to use cyberspace for good are very, very important. And the Geneva Dialogue has here a tremendous contribution by actually coming up with the principles and the ideas that he will discuss today. And with that, let me thank you for your efforts, and I wish you a very pleasant journey.
Thank you, Florian. You basically came up to the bottom line of the Geneva Dialogue, which is different roles of all the stakeholders and what particular actions each one of them can take. We'll dive into that soon. To close this opening remarks, we also have a video message from His Excellency Mr. Burhan Gafoor, Ambassador and Permanent Representative of Singapore to the United Nations in Europe, who is also a chair of the Open-Ended Working Group, or OEWG. We can see the video message.
Excellencies, distinguished delegates, greetings from the United Nations in New York. I'm honored to speak to you today in my capacity as chair of the UN Open-Ended Working Group on the security of and the use of ICTs, which is also known as the OEWG. I want to begin by thanking the Swiss Federal Department of Foreign Affairs for inviting me to participate in today's launch of the Geneva Manual. I would also like to recognize the initiative of the government of Switzerland for bringing the multi-stakeholder community together under the banner of the Geneva Dialogue on responsible behavior in cyberspace to engage in crucial conversations on how the stakeholder community can contribute to states' efforts to foster an open, secure, stable, accessible, peaceful, as well as an interoperable cyberspace. Switzerland has long been a leading voice in international discussions on cybersecurity, and I recognize in particular the contributions made by Ambassador Jürg Lober, a good personal friend of mine, for his very successful role and leadership as chair of the first UN Open-Ended Working Group on Cybersecurity that took place between 2019 and 2021. I'm very much heartened to see that Switzerland has built on this tradition of leadership in the cyber domain to champion this very practical and useful initiative. This year, as many of you might know, marks 25 years since UN member states began deliberations on the issue of cybersecurity in the context of international security at the UN. And since the beginning of these discussions at the UN member states have recognized that cybersecurity is a domain where meaningful cooperation with the stakeholder community, including with members of the private sector, academia, civil society, and the technical community, is essential for the achievement of our common goals. While member states continue to have very different preferences on how exactly the stakeholder community can or should participate in this work, it's nevertheless very clear that all member states recognize the value and contributions that stakeholders are making and can continue to make in this domain of ICT security. Now, against this context, I'd like to offer some of my own reflections from my perspective as the OEWG chair, and I hope that you will consider them in the context of your own discussions today. First, I think it's important for the stakeholder community to focus on making very concrete, specific, and action-oriented contributions. And this is a request that I have also made to member states on many occasions in the context of the OEWG, but I think it bears repeating today. Given the fact that our discussions on ICT security at the UN has evolved over the last 25 years, it is important that both states as well as stakeholders continue to focus their effort on how we can build on what has been previously discussed, how we can make very specific and action-oriented proposals that are aligned with what is being discussed at the UN, and how we can accelerate our efforts to implement or operationalize what has already been agreed. And in this way, both member states as well as the stakeholder community can potentially work together to implement what I would call the cumulative and evolving framework for responsible state behavior in cyberspace that has emerged out of UN discussions. And this kind of collaboration between the stakeholder community and member states, where each side offers concrete ideas to support the process overall, will ensure that the cumulative framework that we have evolved at the UN is not just a set of documents or not just merely words on a page, but the cumulative framework instead can become and potentially become a very powerful document that is practiced and that makes a difference to enhancing international peace and security in the ICT domain. And by focusing on how the stakeholder community can support member states in a very concrete way in order to operationalize and implement the agreed norms, the Geneva Manual, in my view, is a very good initiative. I'm heartened very much by what you have already achieved within the Geneva dialogue process, and I look forward to the development of additional concrete proposals to be included in future editions of the Geneva Manual in the years ahead. The second point that I wanted to make is that I'd like to emphasize that there is a great deal of scope for the stakeholder community to contribute to the work of the UN member states and the international community at large in enhancing international understanding and international peace and security in cyberspace. And the launch of this inaugural edition of the Geneva Manual is an excellent first step. There is a lot more good work that can be built on this and that can be carried out by the stakeholder community. And indeed, I would say in this regard, you are limited only by your energy and ambition. I would encourage all of you to closely look at the recommendations agreed by member states in consensus UN documents and resolutions. And I draw your attention in particular to the second annual progress report of the OEWG, which was adopted by consensus in July 2023, just a few months ago. Now, many of the recommendations in these documents specifically make reference to the contributions that can be made by the stakeholder community in order to help member states achieve and implement the different agreed objectives. And therefore, as you consider the next phase of your work in the context of the Geneva Manual, I suggest that you keep in mind the outcomes of the second annual progress report of the OEWG and consider how you can continue to contribute and bring your expertise, your resources, and your networks in order to support what is being done in the context of the OEWG. Now, distinguished delegates, the third point that I want to make is that I'd like to reiterate the importance for the stakeholder community of working much more closely with each other within the stakeholder community in order to amplify your voice, maximize your impact, and leverage on your resources and knowledge. Now, if you have already participated in our stakeholder dialogues in the OEWG, you will probably remember my repeated calls and messages to the stakeholder community to organize yourselves into like-minded coalitions around common ideas, objectives, or very specific proposals. And as the work of the OEWG and the UN becomes more detailed and very specific, I think it is very important for the stakeholder community to embrace cooperation in order to make sure that your voices contribute directly to the UN discussions and makes a very specific and concrete contribution by helping member states build common ground and implement some of the proposals that are being discussed. And I would also encourage the stakeholder community to continue to leverage on different kinds of platforms, including platforms like the Geneva Dialogue, in order to continue your discussions, develop common initiatives, and to use your collective voice to bring these ideas to the OEWG and support the work of the OEWG. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, the multi-stakeholder community has a very crucial role to play in supporting states in their efforts to further develop and operationalize the framework for responsible state behavior in cyberspace. And since I assumed the chairmanship of this working group, I've always made a personal commitment to engage with the stakeholder community in a systematic, sustained, and substantive manner, and I believe I have done so in this regard. But it is important upon you, members of the stakeholder community, to also keep in pace with the discussions in the open-ended working group so that your efforts are aligned and can potentially even further accelerate the work that is taking place in the context of the OEWG. Now, I'm very excited that in the Geneva Manual discussions are taking place right now, and I look forward to further contributions from future editions of the Geneva Manual that will happen in the months and years ahead. And I wish all of you many fruitful and productive discussions today, and I also hope to see some of you at the upcoming OEWG meetings in New York. I thank you very much for your attention, and I wish you a very productive and successful discussions. Thank you.
Many thanks to Ambassador Gafoor for finding time to address us. We know that next week is the next meeting of the Open-Ended Working Group. But I think this was a good combination of addressing some of us in the audience, and we are quite a mix here, from diplomatic community to businesses, civil society, technical community. It's a good mix. With this, we now dive into nitty-gritty of discussions. The Geneva Manual, I'm tempted to ask how many of you have actually read it, but I'm not going to do that. But if you haven't, the idea of the manual was firstly that it's, and I'm glad that Jovan did, at least diagonally, that it's somehow engaging, that it's a mix of illustrations, stories, guidelines, and so on, and that it's not printed. We didn't print it purposely, both for saving the climate and also to make it, as Jovan said, dynamic, to allow it to be dynamic. So you will have the QR codes all around at any point to go to the manual. But what's more important, we'll actually spend the next, before the lunch period, to run through the manual and discuss it. Firstly, we'll hear from my colleague Anastasiya, just to run through, for all of you that maybe haven't read the manual yet, what it is about, what it brings. Then we'll have a short discussion in a panel format, or not even a panel, it should be a discussion among all of us. We'll have a couple of discussants here, dear guests, but the idea is that all of us share our thoughts on this link between the norms and the practices. And then after the coffee break, we'll have a simulation exercise, a card game. How do we call it? Cyber Guardians, right? Card game. So I hope you'll like it. After the lunch, we'll have a discussion about the next steps. So when it comes to emerging technologies, norms, and the roles of all of us, how do we go ahead with that? We'll close with a sort of a thought-provoking guest speech. I'll shut up now. I'll pass the floor to Nastya to lead us through the Geneva Manual, and then we'll get to a discussion. Nastya, please.
Thank you very much. So it works. Perfect. Okay, that's perfect as well. Hello, everyone. I have a really great pleasure to share about the Geneva Manual. And I think I have an exciting task to wrap up in 10 minutes the results of the work throughout the entire year, and also earlier what we have done within the last 5 years. And also, I think the task to prove to those who come from the private sector and civil society that you all have a really important role to play to implement these norms and promote security and stability in cyberspace. So earlier this year, we at Geneva Dialogue invited over 50 organizations and experts coming from the private sector, civil society, academia, and technical community, because we believe that it is exactly those stakeholders who have so much influence, technology, power in terms of knowledge, expertise, to support states to implement the norms. However, we still had a lot of questions to ask and explore with all of them, particularly what are all of these non-state state stakeholders actually expected to do, and how particularly they can support the states. We had as well many other questions, specifically if there's a critical vulnerability in a digital product or the ICT network that we rely on, or even in a critical infrastructure that poses a threat to national security, what are these actors might do, should do, and how, again, can they support the states? In the context of really interdependent supply chains with so many actors involved, are they also part of the solution? The other question that we ask, especially for those who tend to distance themselves from the areas where presumably technical security is involved, is there a role for civil society, for policy research, for academia, that might actually help to raise awareness for users in terms of the security, who could also be helpful to be the voices of the users in a dialogue with both states and companies to request better policies, more secure products. And we also had a question regarding the users themselves, both as citizens, just we all, but also as organizations. Do they also have responsibility to play to implement the norms and promote responsible behavior? One of the questions specifically for users we had, because still we see that users very much stuck between the choice of affordable prices for the technology, cool features, good functionality, performance, and on the other hand, safety and security. So we ask, could it be no such choice for users, where both actually functionality, affordable prices, and security come together to users? Another, I think, unique perspective that we did within the dialogue was the focus on open source. Those really, I think, miracle people who have so much influence on all of us, because most of the modern products that we rely on consist of the open source products, usually also developed by people for free and by volunteers. So if there's a vulnerability found in this particular open source project, do they have responsibility to mitigate this vulnerability? And what particularly we can expect from them? Finally, though we had much more questions, we didn't focus on the role of the governments. However, we expected that non-state stakeholders would had some expectations towards government and regional organizations. So within Geneva Manual, we also wanted to capture all of the feedbacks, agreements and the disagreements, and frankly speaking, we were ready actually to document as well the areas where stakeholders disagree, because we believe that those are really important areas for policymakers. In the end, we had the framework. We introduced 11 non-binding norms to all this really diverse group of people. But we decided to focus for a start on just 2 norms. The norm related to supply chain security and the norm related to responsible reporting of ICT vulnerabilities. Thus, actually, you already noticed from the questions that I just outlined that our focus was on the security of digital products. Really the core infrastructure, ICT environment in a really broad sense that we all rely on. The choice actually was really obvious for the Geneva Delegate because earlier we already focused on the role of the industry, and we also produced the report documenting the good practices that the industry specifically could do to secure the designs, but also reduce the vulnerabilities. So we introduced these 2 norms. From how they actually formulated, you could see that states are expected to lead and implement the norms. However, the report of the group of governmental experts in 2021 provides really important clarification language, citing at least the private sector and civil society as relevant actors. Still, the question was what specifically they are expected to do. Within the manual, we decided, and at the end, we identified for these 2 norms 5 roles. And for each role, we decided to identify several components. For each role, we saw what are particular roles and responsibilities they need to do, and this is the work component. Then we ask, why actually you could be incentivized to do this? And this is the why component. Definitely, we needed to look at the challenges. And finally, we wanted to inspire others beyond the Geneva Delegate community. That's why we also collected the good practices. And now I just want to wrap up and briefly share the results where actually stakeholders agreed. And there are some of the key highlights that I wanted to focus on. First of all, it was really important that we brought many stakeholders that didn't really have any knowledge about the existence of these norms. So in the end, all of them agreed that these norms are really important. However, they also expressed the need to translate the norms into more practical actions, laws, policies, good governance frameworks to implement the norm on the supply chain security and responsible reporting of vulnerabilities. The private sector is understood to play the bigger role, and if you look at the content of the manual, you will see that the content we develop for the private sector is really larger than for the other actors. And I think this can be quite understood because the private sector is indeed the one who develop, design, operate, and maintain the ICT and ICT's product that we use. However, the civil society has also been cited as really important stakeholder group, particularly because civil society can pressure both governments and companies to enable better policies, more security for users, but also academic policy and research organizations can help to map really nuanced legal, technical, policy challenges, and therefore solutions to implement the norms. Finally, I hope you remember the question that we outlined for the open source communities. Those, again, really miracle people who do write a lot of important stuff for all of us, sometimes for free. So all the experts agreed that they shouldn't have any legal responsibility because in most cases, it is those who use their products in the end product should be responsible for the security and safety. However, we also talk that the open source community do have sort of ethical responsibility to produce as much as possible secure code, and also the communities on the open source really have an important role to help them raise awareness, to use different tools to produce high quality code. We discussed a lot what we do expect from the governments, and definitely governments have been cited to lead by example, to enable a better regulatory and policy environment, but also to enhance transparency, how vulnerabilities being managed and also disclosed, especially if they are reported to public authorities, and the security sector. And this is really important message because we heard a lot of concerns from the actors about the trust dealing with the public authorities and competent authorities to responsibly disclose vulnerabilities. And one of the last but not the least message is specifically to implement the norm on supply chain security. Unfortunately, geopolitics and technological competition has been cited as a negative factor because many experts expressed sort of the hope for a more global approach to ensure the security across different borders. And now I also wanted to highlight that we had a lot of areas where we haven't found the consensus yet, where we haven't found actually the answer yet. And indeed, there have been a lot of really difficult questions. So just the examples of those. For instance, while many experts highlighted that it's really important to develop global rules, we ask, is it really feasible to expect so in the current environment, in the current context? And if so, what would be an appropriate platform to do so for many people coming from different communities to discuss them? How can the implementation of at least both norms can be measured over time? How can we incentivize researchers to responsibly report vulnerabilities to those who are actually responsible to mitigate them? How can we enhance accountability in the cases where vulnerabilities are exploited either for commercial or malicious purposes? And many other questions. So I do really want to engage all of you, those who are in the room who actually contributed a lot, and we're really, really grateful to you all, but also to people who watch us right now. Please do join us to engage further, to collect all the ideas, challenges, and the good practices, because the manual is designed to be a really alive project. It's a sort of the community building project, because we really want to see how the technologies that have been developed impact the life of all of us. This is the website that you actually could, at least online, share your comments, agreements, disagreements. We would be really, really grateful for all of this. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nastya. I'll invite the discussants to join me here at the panel. The idea is, so we have a mix, and as we go, I can briefly, or they can introduce themselves as well. We have a mix of people here with different backgrounds. It's really a showcase, I think, of this multi-stakeholder approach to Geneva Manual. And I want to start with the diplomatic hat first. So I'll firstly turn to Daniel, who is the Swiss representative to the Open-Ended Working Group, among other, and then to Kate, who has been instrumental person of Kenya, a Kenyan representative in the group of governmental experts. So the two persons involved in the political diplomatic negotiations. Daniel, maybe to start with you, for all those that are not too familiar with norms, what are the cyber norms? Why are they relevant? What is this open-ended working group and GGE think about? And particularly because they are voluntary. So how do we understand the role of the norms? I'll give you a couple of mics here, and I invite anyone to jump in at any point. Just raise a hand or grab a mic. Maybe one can be here and then you can pass. And I'll also invite my colleague Andriana, who is a chat moderator in Zoom, to jump in if there are any comments in Zoom. I think there were some already, so I'll get back to her afterwards. Daniel.
Yeah, thank you, Lada, and thank you very much to DiploFoundation, of course, also to Benedikt and his team for organizing this event. I'm a senior advisor in the International Security Division of the Federal Department of Foreign Affairs.
Maybe just close it too.
I'm a senior advisor for cybersecurity in the International Security Division of the Federal Department of Foreign Affairs, and I'm, as has been mentioned, I'm the Swiss representative to the Open-Ended Working Group. Also participated together with Kate in the last GGE, supporting the Swiss expert. So in brief, you could say the norms is the expression by the international community on what is acceptable state behavior in cyberspace. That's in brief. How they should behave, what they should do, and what they should not do in cyberspace. And this has been developed, as has been mentioned, over time in the GGEs, endorsed by all member states in the General Assembly. And then the open-ended working group continues to work on these norms, in particular trying to give more guidance on how to implement them. It's important, I think, also to not forget that these norms have not just been developed in a vacuum, because they quite often are based on international law and legal obligations states have. So this was really an important part of the discussion, and we still continue the discussions. There are legal obligations by states. They have to respect them, also in cyberspace, and it has been agreed by all states that international law applies in cyberspace. The norms are, in a way, you could say, a little mini convention, in a way, a voluntary political convention on how to behave in cyberspace and to prevent conflict in cyberspace.
And maybe jumping to Kate, since Kate, you were there when these norms that we are addressing here about vulnerability and supply chain have been drafted. If you recall back then, did anyone actually have in mind how this is going to be implemented? What is the role of other stakeholders? Or it was more a political agreement and then let's see what's coming after that?
Okay, so thank you very much, and good morning, colleagues. My name is Catherine Getao, retired public servant, but play various roles, including advisor to DiploFoundation in the Africa region. So I was one of the latecomers to the UNGG. I joined in the 2014 and continued working up to 2021, which was the last session of the UNGG. I believe that the UNGG evolved. It was first proposed by the Russian Federation in 1998, and I think Ambassador Gafoor mentioned that it's a 25-year-old process, which is really quite extraordinary, because at the time it was proposed, I've just been checking, there were only 147 million users of the internet, representing 3.6% of the world's population. At the end of last year, this had moved to 5.5 billion users, representing almost 70% of the world's population. And I think the only other technology that has penetrated to this extent is vehicles, which most of us use. So you're asking whether at the time, well, the first really successful report was in 2013, which is like 10 years ago, sorry. Time is moving faster for me now that I've retired. So I think the really significant thing that happened there was a recognition that international law applies in this area. And then in 2015, we got the framework. 2017, there was no report, but there are two significant things that happened in the 2017. One of which is we realized the real points of contention, which is always going to be there, even in this process, because people have different ways of looking at the same issue. But secondly, the OEWG was actually born out of the 2017, because one of the points was these decisions should not be made by a small group of countries. Everybody who is interested should be able to participate. So that was an achievement in 2017. And then in 2021, as Anastasiya has mentioned, the stakeholder group was widened, because initially UNGG was about states and agreements between states to maintain international security. But there was a recognition that now this technology is used by the majority of the world's population, but it is also owned, maintained, developed, researched, etc., by another community, not states. It's the private sector, academia, and so on, and that they need to be involved. So 2021 widened the stakeholders and provided guidance. Did anybody know when they chose this? I think not. But we could already see the risks in terms of vulnerabilities. There's more than one thing that you can do when you discover a vulnerability. You can see it as something to use and exploit for your own benefit, or you can see it as something to be reported in order to keep everyone safe. So there was a recognition that this culture has to be developed where people see vulnerabilities as a common threat, and in order to maintain international security, we need to have the right response. The question now is, who is going to give the right response? Is it all about states? Obviously not. The private sector and the academia are going to be very much involved in discovering vulnerabilities and making the right actions when they discover those vulnerabilities. Similarly with the supply chain. So we may not have realized what we are doing, but I think we made the right call.
Do you remember how these two norms, which are rather technical, how they emerged? So how did it come up in the negotiation process to discuss the vulnerabilities in supply chain?
Well, when you're in a basement in the UN, you probably don't want to remember everything that happened. However, I think initially in the UNGG, there were no developing countries because, as I said, when it began, the technology was not really seen as a developing country technology, especially its significant development and use. Of course, that has changed. And I had to carry my mobile phone because I'm a Kenyan. So everybody knows about Kenyans and mobile phones, except I was almost arrested in Nigeria for making a similar comment 2 months ago when I arrived without my visa and I was trying to show it on the phone. And I said, I'm a Kenyan. I only have things on my phone, and they didn't take it as a joke. So. Okay. So developing countries actually were the ones in their contribution who started raising issues like vulnerabilities and supply chain, because basically they said we are major users of this technology, but these are areas where we don't seem to be in control. We are being sold technology at high cost, which has vulnerabilities. And we are being exposed to a supply chain where not all actors are taking the right actions. So just like the OEWG report now, there are things you read in the report and you wonder, why. But I think it's a good sign that many stakeholders are having their say. Sometimes it may not look coherent, but I think it's important because it means that people with different points of view, with a different perspective, are having their say. And at the end of the day, it comes up to a richer and more relevant document for everybody.
I wonder if any one of you wants to reflect on the role of norms. And if anyone wants, just raise a hand, grab a mic. Mokhtar? You can introduce yourself.
Yes.
I think it works. Let's see. Technology.
Okay, thank you. My name is Mokhtar, and I currently work for the Global Forum for Cybersecurity Expertise. First, I want to make a few comments and complement what Katrin said with regard to the developing world participating in the UNGGE. First of all, when we noted that developing countries are not participating, the bigger group as an African Union, for instance, try to be there to represent the government. They have not been also accepted. So that is just to add on what she has said. So basically the whole African countries were kind of excluded in terms of participation. But that's another question. There is always a reason for that. That's just a small comment. My comment will be about the norms themselves. Yes, it's a good norms, it's very well negotiated and so on. But one thing is always strike me is, are they really those who are capable of implementing them? Are they really following them? i.e., we negotiated agreements, but are those agreements binding, or are they subject to any kind of sanction in case we don't apply them? Specifically, given the cheap world now and the lack of digital cooperation and the competition for dominance in the cyberspace, elephants are fighting there, and what happened to the grass? People who are not really there. So this is just a question we have to ask ourselves about norms. How would we having something really binding and followed by sanction in case you detect or abuse vulnerability or so on? So that is just my initial comments.
Thanks, Mokhtar. Jan.
Okay, so it's working? Wonderful. I think this is a very important point that we should spell out very clearly in the whole cyber norms discussion, because when it was decided in 2013 that international law applies to cyberspace, of course we should celebrate that, but states did something very interesting here. They decided that during the transfer, existing norms lose their binding power. And since then, the legal profession has consistently said, you cannot do that. And the community of states has come back to the legal profession and said, yes, we can. And philosophically, that is an undecided matter, but in practical terms, every single iteration of the cyber norms process has emphasized that these are non-binding voluntary norms. Some of them are new and have been created for this sphere, which we call cyberspace, but some of them are existing norms that used to be binding for decades and centuries, and in cyberspace no longer are, and are now up in the air again. One example I would like to raise is the due diligence norm that first entered international law as part of the Alabama arbitration in 1871, has been confirmed as binding by the Hague Convention in the early 20th century. And now the status is that the government group of experts says due diligence preventing your networks as a state to be used to harm others is a non-binding duty, part of the cyber norms. According to the open-ended working group, this was a duty in the zero draft published in January 21 and disappeared completely from the final draft published in March 2021. So according to the open-ended working group, due diligence no longer exists in cyberspace. And that is where we are. We are at an early stage of these discussions, and I think it's worth reflecting that maybe we're expecting too much from states to sit down around a table and give themselves binding onerous duties around a negotiation table and just agree on that. There was a very brief period when international law worked like that in the immediate post-Cold War period, and I think there are good indications that we're at the end of this period, and that we go back to how international law and big international conventions was made before, and that is that norms were forged through fire. That we had crises, we had disputes, we had states calling out on each other saying, you cannot do that. And then these cases were studied, and states backed down, and other states took notice and wrote these rules down. And then when the historical moment had come for a big negotiation, these rules all came up again. Again, if we look at the Hague Conventions, some of the rules in there had been decades old at the time they were codified there. But they had been respected for decades before. And I think we're going to see something similar in cyberspace as well. And we are watching this in real time. Let's take a look at Ukraine. What are the norms for civilian hacktivists participating in a cyber war? What are the duties of states that are hosting cyber warriors taking part in another war, attacking critical infrastructure in another country? Does Switzerland have to prosecute them? Yes or no? What are the binding norms? We are watching this process in real life. And so I think we should take a step back and accept our responsibility as the chroniclers of this process, and maybe as ones on the sidelines providing guidance, but step back from the assumption that there's going to be a big meeting in New York where 200 states sit around the table and sort it all out.
Thank you, Anna. What's interesting with the norms in cyber is that whether the states want or not to implement them, they are being implemented every day by the private sector, civil society, and others, such as vulnerability disclosure, security by design. So that's an interesting interplay between the states and the others. We'll move to that hat of the implementers in a second. Daniel, you wanted to come in. Kate, can we take him? Oh, you have.
Yeah, thank you. And sorry for taking the floor again, just after having made a short statement. I just wanted to say that I don't think that is the correct reading of the discussions in the open-ended working group or the GGE or the consensus among states. States did not replace international law by norms. I wouldn't say that. The framework consists of 4 elements of international law, and states have agreed that it applies in cyberspace. No exceptions made. Nobody said this or this rule does not apply. And that is very important for us, Switzerland. And that is what we push in the negotiations or discussions in the open-ended working, that we continue discussing on how it applies. The question, if it applies or not, is resolved. It applies. The second part are the norms, voluntary, as you said, but they do not replace international law. That is not the understanding we have in the open-ended working group. It's a voluntary political commitment how to behave. And there are 11 norms. As you can imagine, as Kate have said, you sit in a building without windows, you have states, they have to agree. And it's not so easy to agree what is responsible behavior in states. But for example, the due diligence norms, it doesn't depend if it's cyber or not. It's international law, but not all states see it as a legal obligation of international law. As you know, the United States, they have a different view. But they do not put into question that international law applies, and they also say we accept that this is a rule or a norm of responsible behavior. It doesn't replace international law, you know. And then, of course, you have the capacity building as a part of the framework and the confidence building measures. So this all forms part of it. The bigger challenge we see as Switzerland now in the discussion is that some states push for new binding norms, wanting to reshape the rules in cyberspace. And in our point of view, it's more important that we continue discussing how the actual international law is applied, so that states can do that. But as you know, it's not only in cyber, also in other areas, states don't always respect their obligations of international law. As you mentioned, the war in Ukraine. I mean, we have many breaches of the most basic rules. And what you also mentioned, I just wanted to say, this is a discussion we also try to push in the UN. What happens in situations of armed conflict? Of course, international humanitarian law applies. So how to deal with these hacktivists and all these groups that are active, that is a big challenge. And we have developed very good rules in international humanitarian law, how to deal with that. But as always, and not only in cyber, it's always a challenge of implementing and, you know, if crimes were committed, to prosecute. But I wouldn't say this is very different from the other areas of international law. Cyber is a tool, in a way, in the end, for states to use. It doesn't make any difference to other areas, in my opinion.
Now, Kate, and then I actually wanted to go to the non-diplomats, in a way, to reflect on this. Kate?
Very quickly, due diligence was a practical problem, and that is why states were a little bit uncomfortable, especially developing states, because we're asking, okay, you give us a legal obligation to show due diligence, but are you willing to share the knowledge that we require? A lot of this technology is offered to us as a black box. Do we have the resources to perform the actions, and do we have the capacity to perform the due diligence? So there's a difference between making those rules and make it possible for everyone. And I'm not surprised that as you bring in more nations, then the issue of the practicality of the rules that you are making becomes very real. The other thing is norms is about culture. And the fact that we're all quietly seated here in this meeting shows, and we all come from very different organizations, backgrounds, genders, countries, etc., shows the power of culture, even when it is non-binding. So norms were a starting point, I think, for many nations before making things law, which then it would never be passed. It would not pass behind those nations, but they will accept it as a norm, and eventually it becomes part of the culture of nations, and it becomes binding in a certain way because people do not want to be outliers. And those who don't mind being outliers, they will be outliers whether there's law or whether it's just culture.
Thanks, Kate. Let me invite Adriana, our remote moderator or Zoom moderator, to jump in with a quick summary what has been happening in the Zoom in chat. Adriana, any reflections from the chat?
Hello, everyone. Many reflections in the chat. Let me first start with apologizing for my video. It's a very gloomy day and overcast day in Belgrade, and my apartment, unfortunately, faces the north. But as long as you can hear me correctly, I think we're in the clear. And as I'm speaking, there's another comment. I apologize that I won't be able to summarize this one as well. It's a pretty long one. So let me start with what happened during the keynotes. Many comments have come in. Isatou said, while there has been no shortage of initiatives that would establish rules of behavior in cyberspace, state behavior in particular, respective outcomes have highlighted unique challenges which are faced by norm entrepreneurs in cyberspace. Questions of contrasting conceptualization of cyberspace and varying threat perceptions have timid attempts to establish a globally acceptable set of norms that regulate state behavior. They also reflect that cyber threats often constitute a manifestation or an extension of pre-existing tensions and rivalries, and therefore cyberspace is a revealing feature of dynamics at play in a state or a country. Now, Chris said that as we are rapidly approaching the emergence of artificial intelligence utility and quantum utility as well, we need to start designing and implementing a global mechanism to tackle the safety of digital technologies across all aspects of usage. And to do this, we need to harness the technologies such as AI and quantum, and concepts such as distributed multi-stakeholder governance organization. This mechanism needs to be embedded into the supply chain for ICTs, and we need to harness the cooperation of the state and non-state actors to participate in this mechanism. Asal, on a very similar note, says that we need to enhance mutual support between stakeholders and complement each other's initiatives to make cyberspace a safe and secure digital environment. I will now switch to the questions. Lada, we have two. Isatou asks, do states have sufficient means and capabilities to work with international partners in fighting cybercrime and countering terrorist use of ICTs? And are all states able to engage in international police cooperation? And another question is, do states have policies, memorandums of understanding, mutual legal assistance treaties, or other arrangements in place that guide international police and law enforcement cooperation regarding cybersecurity? I'd give the floor back to you at this point, and perhaps you will give me the floor once again before the panel is done.
Thank you, Adriana. Two interesting bits there. One was that Kate already reflected on the capacities of countries to actually enforce all these agreements. And the other one is this multi-stakeholder global mechanism for governance. That's an interesting one. I want to flip the coin now and turn to the business community, technical community, NGOs. Maybe starting with you, XZ. Okay, you have been in discussions about within the Geneva Dialogue for quite some time already. You are familiar with the norms from those discussions. How do you see, from the business perspective, all these norms. You know that the private sector has been doing a lot for times on security by design, on trying to disclose vulnerabilities in a coordinated way, on supply chain, but now combination with norms. What are your reflections?
First and foremost, an introduction of myself. I'm Xiangzhen XZ, the Vice President of Advisory at Ensign for Security, which is in Asia Pacific one of the largest pure play cybersecurity companies. I wanted to reflect one fact before I jump into the answer. The latest report from ISC Square actually highlighted that we are 4 million cybersecurity talent short globally. That expresses an extreme and acute shortage of manpower to deal with cybersecurity problems, regardless of whichever stratosphere of organizational resource you actually come from. And then back to the question. I think businesses are doing cybersecurity out of necessity, regardless of whether there's a norm in place or not. Because for the more well-resourced, so there are two polarities, right? There's the more well-resourced and there's the less well-resourced. I emphasize this in many of our conversations. The more well-resourced clearly have more competent people, have more, hopefully, ethical people that are thinking about these problems in a very deep manner and trying to make things right. So that's where, when we are building out products and services, we think about designing cybersecurity into those offerings upstream. And it's not altruistic in nature, it's because solving the problems later, when it's already being used, is much more problematic and costly. So it's out of necessity that such practices are already in place, whether it's security by design, security by default, continuous security testing, making sure that there is a life cycle approach in terms of addressing inception of a solution or service until its death. For the more well-resourced organizations, this is kind of things that we are constantly pondering about. Now we flip the coin to the other side, which is the less well-resourced organizations. They might just have one person appointed to look at cybersecurity, but that's not necessarily the main role. The main role will be keeping the lights on, making sure that the digital technologies all just work, right? But therein lies an endless firefighting battle that they go through. Okay, this system somehow doesn't work as expected, and then how do I actually troubleshoot and make it work? So when you go to this kind of organizations and yet they are producing products and services to be able to serve whatever part of the supply chain at all, asking them to do more, even if it is a norm, is actually quite a monumentous challenge from a resource and competency standpoint. This could be very easily a technical graduate or a diploma graduate, but not necessarily having the experience and depth of knowledge to be able to address it. Contrast that to the more well-resourced, they are able to employ postgraduate studies personnel to be able to advise and grow those capabilities. So the challenges are uneven, and I think the state actors are also very cognizant of the unequalness in distribution of capability and resources, likewise in businesses. I would say that, and I know it's possibly your next question, but a movement that is now happening is probably the definition of minimum standards of what cybersecurity is coming out. There are drafts that I'm aware of at the ISO forums that are discussing, maybe it's for basic devices for now, but could that progress into larger products and systems? I'm hopeful. But yeah, that's how I would respond.
Just a quick question. When you take the hat of the vendors and developers of digital technologies, what are the incentives? That's part of the discussion we had in Geneva Manual. One is the set of actions that you can take, but the other one is what are the drivers? What are the incentives? So you mentioned the market itself to some extent, probably ethics to some extent, but and the regulatory frameworks. How do you see the impact of norms, of these voluntary norms, which are high level, political? Does that impact how the companies behave? how might they behave?
So once again, it's two sides, right? And the more well-resourced will take advantage of aligning their already practiced behaviors to they say that, I'm also conformant with whatever norms that are established. And therein lies a marketing endeavor to suggest that, I'm actually moving along the right side of whatever is happening in the world right now. Unfortunately, it creates a stratification once again that the less resourced organizations will then be suffering to say that I'm already firefighting every day and I can't even catch up to what's bare minimum to make things right. Then you make the gap even larger and larger over time. Is that what we are after? So I think that's, once again, unfortunately, a question rather than a response. But that divide is something that we need to watch out for.
Please. You can introduce yourself.
Okay. I would like to take this chance to share our viewpoints. By the way, I introduce myself. My name is Martin Xie. I'm the director of Cybersecurity Transparency Center in Brussels. I'm from Huawei. Okay. I think I'm a good representative of the ICT manufacturer or vendor. And this topic is really interesting for us because as Mr. Xiang shared, that is actually aligned with our history. I'd like to cite an example for Huawei. Okay, Huawei, when we talking about cybersecurity, we actually involve in 3 phases. The first phase is what we call cybersecurity 1.0. We're talking about how to prove that we are due diligence, how to guarantee that our product is secure enough to make our customer have confidence with us. So this is the 1.0. Okay, it's like doing your own business good enough to guarantee that your customer do not have problem with you. Okay, this is the do your job. And since 2018, we starting our cybersecurity 2.0. In this phase, we are not thinking about only ourselves. We are thinking that how we can help our customer, the operators, and the enterprise to become more resilient to cyber attack. So extend from doing our job to help our customer to do better by them job. Okay, so this is an evolution. It's like you just sweep the slow in your door, but now you're trying to sweep the slow in the road. This is the second phase. And now we are in the third phase, okay? Cybersecurity 3.0. We are thinking that how we can provide a good product and solution which can help customer to defend the cyber attack. How we can share the cyber intelligence which help our customer and the big community to understand the threats and better respond to that. This is cybersecurity 3.0. In this stage, cybersecurity is not only self-defense, but also is a proactive matters which can help the community have the biggest stakeholder to better protect the digital world. So it's actually I think this 3.0 is just reflect how the company look at cybersecurity as their internal driver from the vendor perspective. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think one of the key words again is the evolution, because it really takes time to go through, and especially as XZ, as you mentioned, you have entities which have very limited resources, and then you have some which have much more. Right?
20 years,
20
evolution.
Years, exactly, yeah. Mokhtar.
Just a small comment, and I hope I still PC, meaning politically correct. When everybody spoke, they mentioned the issue of ethic, right? State behavior, norm, and so on. But sometimes it strikes me a lot on what is actually being agreed upon around the table and within international context, and what is happening behind back when you go to your states. One example is this issue of the war chip that is happening between some big countries. And in one hand, we see those who are actually driving the UN processes and norms saying that there is some technology that is not usable. And in fact, they are not using it within their countries. But they use it 100% in your filials back in Africa. So that is really something what is striking me in terms of ethics. Something you don't like for yourself because you think that is not good, but you still take it to somewhere else to use it. What is that in terms of ethics, norms, and behaviors? This is something that has not been really addressed properly. Sorry for being, maybe not PC, but that is something you know to talk about. And it's just come because of what we have spoken.
Thanks. You can pass the mic there, and then I'll move here.
Yes, Boris Engelson, journalist freelance. It's very reckless from me to speak now, as first I have bad hearing. I could not hear everything and have very weak brain. But you insisted on the role of civil society, which in a way I am part of. In any case, there are 5 minutes left. A lot of industries have had security problems over the time, over the generation. Most of them were able to fix it, even banks. The only one or ones which are still at pains and where an insecurity booms is computer science, namely the web, and to some extent, medicine. So I was curious, and at a IGF, Internal Governance Forum session, just on the eve of the Kyoto meeting, I heard an expert, and he's a high caliber expert. He was very wild about the obstacle to fix security. And I was curious, I mailed him, and this is what I got from him. It's about defending the public core of the internet. The heart of this core is the internet standards that make it work. They are attacked the whole day as they remain unnecessarily insecure. I stress the unnecessarily. And this is the question which, in spite of the dozens of cybersecurity meetings I have attended, I still don't know why 30 years or 40 years after the invention of the net, the computer science was not able to fix this when even the airline world has, the banks have, the post has, the trains have, the car industry have, just computer science cannot. So there might be some technical difficulties, but according to that high caliber expert, the problem doesn't lie there.
Thank you, and that brings us back to this dialogue between the political and diplomatic level and the practitioners and so on. I want to build now on what Exi started, which is the role of the companies and institutions, and actually focus on the supply chain part. So Madison, if you want to take the floor, in Geneva Dialogue discussions, there was a lot about the responsibility and the role of the open source. And we know that, well, you can tell it better, the percentage of the third-party components code, which is typically from the open source community, which ends up in high caliber, very important mass products. What is the role and even responsibility of the open source there? It is a very specific type of community. How does that all interplay with these norms and responsibilities?
Hi, everybody. My name is Madison Oliver. I manage the advisory database at GitHub. I formerly worked at the Software Engineering Institute at the CERT Coordination Center, coordinating vulnerabilities on behalf of the US government. So I have quite a broad range of perspective, I guess I will say. So I'm here on behalf of the technical community and open source community. So to better answer your question, I'll say I believe that security should really be a shared accountability. Many of the discussions that I have been in and that I have seen tend to put a lot of blame on open source. And to be honest with you, I think that's the easy route. I think it's very easy for vendors, organizations, governments to say, open source is bad, we should not use it, they need to be better. And I also think, on the other hand, it's very easy for open source to say, big vendors are bad, government is bad, they're asking too much from us, so we're just not going to do it at all. I think both of those viewpoints are wrong, personally, but I think we see both of them in practice extensively. And I think that we need to move more towards a shared model of responsibility and accountability, especially when it comes to security. which is why I'm delighted to be a part of this sort of effort and this sort of organization, because I think it's very important to have all viewpoints, everybody here, but also mine included. I think there is an emphasis on users and vendors of open source software to be responsible. And I would say I personally agree with that as well. If you are using software, I do believe that you have a responsibility, if you care about security, to ensure that what you're using is secure. I would also say that you shouldn't have to be a security expert to be able to make that decision. You as an organization, you as a user, if you're deciding what to use, you shouldn't have to have a master's degree in cybersecurity to evaluate the software and decide that this is good. We should make that easier as well as an industry, as regulators, as governments, as myself in my position. I think that we should make that as easy as possible, as easy to understand as possible. I would say the same for open source developers. There's a huge emphasis that open source developers need to be better at security. They may not be security experts. Most of the time, in my experience, they're not. They're developers, they are engineers, they are computer scientists, and security has long been not a part of those processes, I will say. That is thankfully beginning to change. Slowly but surely, we are including more cybersecurity related material in courseworks at universities, in many, many different places. So I would say I don't want anybody to assume malicious intent or deliberate negligence either, especially when it comes to open source, because that is something that I see very often. If an open source developer is unable to remediate a vulnerability or is unaware of it and is perceived to have deliberately created bad software, that immediately taints the relationship. So if you are reporting something to them and you are assuming that they did this on purpose, they're bad, they are less likely to want to work with you, which is deeply unfortunate. And the process will just be tainted from the start. So I'm a huge advocate of vulnerability, transparency, and empathy in security, and remembering that the thing on the other side of the computer is truly a human being. And there are lots of factors to this beyond just the desire to do something, but the ability to do something. So I believe that organizations that use open source software, they care about open software, which I'm going to make an assumption that they do if they're using it, that they should do more to support them, especially as needed. Hopefully that answered your question.
There was an interesting analogy that we had. On one hand, there was a statistics that almost 90% of code in many commercial software is actually third party, is open source. On the other hand, there was an analogy that it is almost like if you produce, I don't know, you make a cookie for yourself, but you publish it on the receipt and you say, okay, anyone can use it for free, but I'm not responsible for allergies or whatever inside. You have to think about it when you're using it. So the responsibility actually comes to those that are creating a mass effect. Does that stand? How do you see that responsibility interplay between the vendors and the open source? And then I'll get back to you, Sean.
Yeah, I think that's a very good analogy. From my perspective, the person eating the cookie, the vendor consuming the open source software, they need to know, this is what is important to me, this is what I need this to do, this is my threat landscape, this is my risk appetite, and this is what I am willing to accept. And they need to either evaluate the software or get enough information from the maintainer of said software to validate that that matches what they need. The open source maintainer or contributor should also ensure that that information is then obvious to end users or folks that want to use their software. So I think they also have a responsibility to say, this is what my software does. Maybe this is what my software doesn't. This is what my expectations are. Anything beyond this is unreasonable expectations for this software. Should you want to use it in that way, that is on you, right? So it's I think it creates a level of agency between both parties, and that is occasionally, I think, what is lost. So if you, as the one consuming the software, have enough agency and enough information to be able to cognitively, deliberately make that decision and accept that risk, whatever it may be, I think that is perfect. But oftentimes that is what is lacking. And I think it is also on those providing the software to be able to give that level of insight, knowledge, and expectations.
Thanks, Sean.
Thank you, Sean Jovan from the World Economic Forum Center for Cybersecurity.
Let me take this one just in case.
Sean Doyle from the World Economic Forum Centre for Cybersecurity. A question for Ms. Oliver, and thank you very much. You've noted that the but the large corporate users of open source software, they have a greater role to play in this. There's an awful lot of things they could be doing. So what would you have them prioritize?
That is a fantastic question. Let me pull up my note cards. I have lots of suggestions. In my opinion, I think it's very important to bake security in at every level. Again, we should make it as easy as possible for developers to develop secure software. They don't and should not have to be security experts to be able to do that well. So giving them the tools to code better at the very beginning upon project creation and inception. Ensuring that wherever that code is hosted safely, can be shared safely, that I will say basic security measures are met. I think there are a lot of high impact, low effort measures that can be put in place. Two-factor authentication, I will say, is a relatively, I'll say, kind of easy one, though can be a hard one to get open source community buy-in for lots of reasons. But having security measures like that, where the code is hosted, where developers pull the code from, the package repositories, the package registries, having more measures in place at levels like that, in addition to at the beginning of the supply chain, I'll say, when the code is originally created, and then at the end, having more measures in place when there is a vulnerability disclosed, assisting them in what to do with it, how to handle it, giving them advice. That's something that I'm personally passionate about, and something that my group at work does very often for open source maintainers as well, is giving disclosure advice, helping them through reporting, creating guidance on what to do and how to do it and what to care about. Because oftentimes it is not negligence, it is not malintent, it is maybe the first time that this has happened, or they don't have many resources for this. I don't know how many folks have been involved in an incident gone awry, but I have. And I will say too, I have heard from the open source community, when that happens, it makes it that much more difficult for them to continue getting resources to respond to security vulnerabilities, especially when you're talking about it from a volunteer aspect. If you are volunteering for something that is a horrible process and extremely painful, you're very unlikely to do it again. So oftentimes there will be this push to get that security knowledge, to find an expert that knows how to respond to the specific thing that was sent to them, and then that subject matter expertise can be lost because the process was so bad. So making those processes easier, more transparent, giving support to them when they need it, I think is incredibly important. Something that I think is lacking overall too is, if you do need that support and it is available, how do you find it? Where do you go? And I think making that better or more well known is also going to be very helpful.
Jan. Thanks. I think before we close, it's also time for me to introduce myself formally. I'm Jan Lemnitzer. I teach cybersecurity at Copenhagen Business School, and I'm also PI of a project on supply chain cybersecurity, where we just got funding for 2 years, and I'm very sympathetic to the Geneva dialogue, and I think that was part of the reason I was invited. What this project tries to do is to take the requirements in EU regulation and developments on the top players of industry on supply chain cybersecurity and translate them and help those that have to execute them, which is mostly SMEs, who are the suppliers to big companies, who get emails saying, here's our questionnaire with 150 questions on your IT security. Can you please fill that out promptly and also show us the cybersecurity standards you follow? And for many small companies, that's a real challenge. And what we're trying to do is trying to translate this cybersecurity standards language into plain, these are things you'll understand once we talk about what your company does. And this is how you communicate to others that you actually have secure practices in mind. And we're trying to do this translating job. And if you want to get in touch about how this might work, very welcome. And where I'd like to really praise the Geneva Dialogue and the Geneva Manual is they are trying to do this kind of role for the cyber norms process. Because let's be honest, if you, for example, look at the vulnerability disclosure norm in the cyber norms process, it's not about the open source community. If you read this norm, it is clearly about the conflict between those within states who think 0 days are a fantastic thing to hoard within your intelligence branch and use them for intelligence purposes when you need them. And there are others within states and other communities who think 0 days are a danger for the wider public and should be patched as quickly as possible. And that's a conflict of interest within states. And this cyber norm is designed to resolve that. And there is very little thought about what happens if the 0 day isn't actually found and used by the NSA and stored in a proper or improper way, but actually in an open source project that is manned by 5 people in Montana. And what happens then after it's been widely used by 3 different global software companies. And that is where I think the work of the Geneva Dialogue is particularly valuable, and I think it's very appropriate that this is what we're going to be playing out in the simulation game later on, because that aspect is lacking from the cyber norms discussion at state level, which is quite understandable. States care about state business. I'm not sure if I got my figures right, but I think there's about 25,000 vulnerabilities newly discovered and cataloged every year. Yeah. Yeah. So there's a lot of work to be done by a lot of people. And I think systematically thinking about how we can achieve that is a very valuable thing. And just to give one anecdote of where we are in this world right now, there is a project at Google called Project Zero. And that's just a elite hacker unit of Google. They're just given complete freedom to find 0 days and make sure that they are patched and that they are closed and something is being done about them. And that's their mission. And that's what they're given money for by Google. Now, occasionally, they find 0 days in the open that are actively exploited, but the people doing the exploiting are not cyber criminals, but Western or non-Western intelligence agencies. And the simulation I play with my students is, I say, okay, you're head of Project Zero, you're running your business, and someone from the CIA approaches you and says, you are interfering with an ongoing Western intelligence operation, please stop. And the task for the students is to discuss, what do you do? Most students come up and say, well, if the CIA comes to you like that, then you do what the CIA wants. And then we have a discussion saying it is quite significant for international relations that in real life, when this happened 2 years ago, Google said, no, we have a global commitment towards finding vulnerabilities and patching them. And for us, it doesn't make any difference whether the request comes from the CIA or the FSB. And that's where we are in the world right now, and I think there's plenty of debates to be had how this process of vulnerability disclosure is going to be working and should be working, from with the conflict within states, intelligence branch versus consumer protection, all the way down to what happens if the vulnerability is down to code produced by one guy and uploaded on GitHub.
Thank you, Anna. We have a few more minutes. Quick comment from XZ, and then I want Juan Pablo to wrap up from the civil society perspective, because ultimately we are all users. XZ.
So very quickly, I think I wanted to reflect on addressing cybersecurity for SMEs. And the cybersecurity labeling scheme, trust marks, are some of the ways that I see good promise in moving in that direction, where SMEs that are serving larger organizations don't have to answer the 150 questions and continuous due diligence actions that they have to do, but actually attain through a one-time effort that's valid for some number of years, the level of trust that consumers should have of them. So in Singapore, we have the CyberSafe Essentials, which is a subset of the ISO 27001 standard. And that provides a step-up opportunity for small and medium enterprises, not to deal with the 100% of what ISO 27001 says, but to go with the most important. Of course, this is coming from a unique Singapore lens. What is the most important that less well-resourced organizations should have, and then also bring them to the level of maturity so that they have the next opportunity to then say, after I've achieved this, what's next? And then maybe I introduce more and more competent people into the organization that at some point in time, I will say, I dare put my hands up and I want to go for ISO 27000. So that's one path. The other aspect is on the products and services, which is a cybersecurity labeling scheme. I know not only Singapore, but places like Germany, Netherlands, and US has also started very recently to go on this labeling scheme. And in Singapore, we have so many labels for our solutions. There's water efficiency labels, there's energy saving labels. This is actually something that is very familiar for us. So the consumers actually are very willing to say, I will choose the product that has this mark versus the product that does not have this mark. In fact, the program is running for, I think, 3 or 4 years already. And the key retailers are actually reflecting that more consumers are buying those products that are certified compared to those that are not. So just some reflections there.
Thanks, Xi. And I think this is also important to see the interplay of practices with regulations and policies like labeling schemes, and then how the norms play with that. Juan Pablo, we've kept you silent for quite a while, but I think it's actually a good closing. You come from an NGO, which is both doing the vulnerability disclosure and research and advocating to support civil society and, well, all of us. Where do you see the role of civil society in all of that? Maybe Charisma is a specific example, but...
Okay, hi everybody. My name is Juan Pablo Parra. I am from Fundación Charisma. We are an NGO in Colombia who promote human rights and cybersecurity practices. It's a big question. What is our role? And I want to start saying that depend of the organization, the type of organization, because it's not the same Fundación Charisma, a small organization in Colombia, that Electronic Frontier Foundation. And it's not the same Fundación Charisma than other NGO who, because Charisma have a lot of technology knowledge, because we have cybersecurity lab inside the Charisma. Then depend of the role of the characteristic of the NGO. But I want to explain some examples of how we help the Colombian government to implement his cyber norms. The first thing that I think when my boss told me you will do this was, well, why we need cybersecurity norms? The obviously answer was we need cybersecurity norms to protect the people. Not to protect the system, to protect the people. But why we could prove that, for example, a cyber attack affects not just the state system, affect to the people. We choose cyber attack case in Colombia the last year. A private enterprise who bring healthcare services was attacked. They suffer ransomware, and we start to speak with the customers and ask what happened with them during the cyber attack. And a lot of people saying to us, my history healthcare were lost. We have to restart all my healthcare process. Or people say, I couldn't give my medicines because the system was wrong. Then when that information, we think, well, we know that the cybersecurity norm should help the people. Yes. Then we go with the government and say, you know that you have a regulation about how the state should do about cyber attacks. And of course, we don't explain how you respond to a ransomware, but it's important that you think that for example, when you prioritize whose system you download again, you should prioritize that system were related with the human rights, for example, healthcare in Colombia. Then we're trying to think how help the people and how implement cyber norms in Colombia, thinking in really local level. For example, is we have technical expertise in charisma, and someday one of our cybersecurity researchers say us, I found a vulnerability in a Colombian system, and we think we don't know, we don't have a vulnerability disclosure route in Colombia. Then we go with the government and say, we found a problem with your system. We believe that between you and us, we can construct capacities to process vulnerabilities. And the state say you will go to jail because you access to my system. And I respond, no, I don't access to your system. This will be done with no penetration process. But it's really important that you understand that you have vulnerabilities in your system, and the best way to do this is create confidence between us and let us explain to you what is your vulnerabilities, what is the vulnerability in your system. And that was successful because we create with the Ministry of ITC in Colombia the first vulnerability disclosure route in Colombia. The vulnerability disclosure route just works for Charisma Foundation, but other people who knows about vulnerabilities start to send us his reports, and we pass the reports to the government. Sometimes we need the people because we can explain all the report, then we help create confidence between the government and other kind of civil society organizations. And we help too with the relation between the press media and the government when the press media speak about cybersecurity attacks or vulnerabilities, because we have a case in Colombia when one person found a vulnerability in a system of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and you can check all the passports in Colombia, all the passports. And the people go to the ministry and say, I found this, and the ministry don't understand what he was trying to explain, and the person think, well, I need to do something, and the person go with the media, and media publish the vulnerability with a lot of details, a lot of details. Then if you know something of technology, you could down all the passports in Colombia. And of course, when Charisma watch this, we say, oh my God, this is a big problem. Then we go with the ministry, we go with the media, and explain both what happened, and of course, the media understand what we'll do, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs understand what happened, and the media changed, the media press changed his first publication, and the ministry fixed his vulnerability. And with that in mind, we start to explain other civil organizations what could do about vulnerabilities. Then we create a guide for media press about how they could speak about cyber attacks, or how could we speak about vulnerabilities. But this guide helped the government to create more transparency policies about vulnerabilities and cyber attacks, because a lot of people know about cyber attacks when a media press publish Colombia suffered a cyber attack in tal system, in whatever system. When you are normal people and you read that kind of reports, you sometimes feel fear because, oh my God, I need that report for something. And if the government don't be transparent with what happened, that could be dangerous for us. And then we try to promote transparency policies about cyber attacks and vulnerabilities with our government. And that's another example of what could do. Finally, Charisma is participating in the UN process about technologies, the OEWG, and the Hackdoc Committee about cyber norms. And we play a role in that process, a small role in the international context, because now all the states know who is Charisma, but in the local level, we help a lot to a state to create a better position on how we can do that, because we start to speak with the Colombian delegates in the UN, and when we come back to Colombia, we say, I want presenting you that guy is a representation of a private enterprises specialized in cybersecurity, or that guy works in a open source is a open source development, and that create an unexpected dialogues about what Colombia needs or what is the Colombia position in this kind of events. Then that's all. I don't know.
Thanks, Juan Pablo. I think this is amazing examples of how you actually put down these high-level things to a very tangible human rights person, challenges of passports, databases, health, and so on, and a fascinating role of a civil society. Well, in your example, there are many others on all of that. We'll have time to dive into specific roles of all of those stakeholders in the next iteration in a simulation exercise. We are through the timeline, but you can expect that from someone coming from Balkan to always push a little bit the agenda. So we'll take some 10 minutes coffee break. We'll come back, then we'll split into small tables. We'll have a card game. We'll explain how it works. Nastya will run through the scenario exercise, and I think it'll be quite fun. So grab a coffee. For our colleagues in Zoom, we make a break for you now because the simulation exercise really requires a face-to-face meeting. We apologize for that, but we hope to see you back at 2:30 more or less for the second part of the event today. So for colleagues from Zoom, 2:30 back. And for all of you, 10 minutes break and then see you back in the room. Thanks a lot for all of you. Cyber norms, particularly these two. If it shows how different stakeholders can play with each other to fulfill those norms, the question is now with new technologies that we are going to get, not least emerging threats when it comes to cybersecurity, but also artificial intelligence, quantum, metaverse, the pace of technological development versus norms, many of them voluntary. How are we actually going to play with that in future? And I'll pass the floor to Jovan, who will moderate the next discussion. And again, I encourage all of you to jump in at any point when you want. Jovan.
Thanks, Vlada. Before inspirational, we will have conspirational session. And it's really great to be today to discuss future after the lunch. Is there a future after the lunch? There is, but while I was walking from the restaurant, I saw this book from Escher. I have to return. The guy told me, "Oh, don't! It's not for the reading." And basically, Escher is Dutch painter who was drawing the impossible perspectives. He is well known for the. If you are in The Hague, I suggest that you visit his museum. It's fantastic. But basically, what we are trying to do in our discussion today, and in particular now, is that we are trying to deal with Escher's problems of different perspective, counterintuitive situations. Now it sounds too difficult, but it will be very easy with our three panelists. We have with us today Annie Mahon, is it correct? Mahon, sorry. Formerly MI5, great title, currently a private campaigner, author, media commentator, and international public speaker. I'm sure that you follow some of Annie's discussion, blog posts, sessions. It's great to have you, Annie, with us, and especially to deal a bit of Escher's tension between MI5 former operative and today privacy advocate. And we will come to the points why this tension or not tension is important for our discussion. We have with us Mokhtar Yedali, former Minister of Digital Transformation of Mauritania, but I would say more importantly, former head of African Union Commission ICT Directorate. And Mokhtar is a person behind Malabo Convention, African Union Digital Strategy, and everything basically which has happened within the African Union in digital was done by him. He's very modest, but I can confirm Vlada and I have been. Okay. Anita Lamprecht is active member and ambassador, plenipotentially extraordinary, I can tell you, of the non-profit legal think tank Liquid Legal Institute. Thank you, Anita, for being today with us. Thank you, three of you. As always, challenge of after lunch session, the distribution of blood is not fair between brain and stomach. And as long as you don't feel as long as we don't notice you sleeping, it's fine. Therefore, if you can sleep in camouflaging way, it's okay. Now there is one joke in Diplo. I promise I won't make PowerPoint, and I really don't like PowerPoints. And Vlada was telling me, I was approaching him and he was telling me, you want to ask me about PowerPoint before the session? I say yes, and they had a bet within the team that I will ask for PowerPoint. The reason is very simple. When we have discussion at our table, I started getting inspirations, and I said, oh, why we don't show this image to the rest of you? Therefore, there won't be text, there will be just images. This is the challenge that I've been facing myself for now 20 plus 30 years dealing with digitalization. Can we have solution that we answer the phone calls of citizens, companies, countries, governments on e-commerce, cybersecurity, nowadays AI? It's a very basic question. Is there a phone call that we can call to have substantive ask? Okay, I know you will tell, there are certs, there are in police, but substantively, do we have solutions? That's the real question that we will discuss AI and the other issues, but my starting assumption is that no, nobody's answering the phone calls. And all of us involved in digital governance, in the Geneva Manual, in other fields, we have to see who should answer the calls. Because if we don't do that, we are not delivering on the basic element of the social contract between citizens and governments. In the traditional world is a physical protection. In the digital world, it's this. This is the second image which inspired me. Second, and I invite you, those of you who follow my presentation, it's my sort of must presentation. Let's be counterintuitive. Things are not an easy. There are many things in flux, and we should look for the Escher's paradox and the solutions. What I think Geneva Dialogue did very well, and we did it at the table in preparations, is reducing lost in translation between techie guy who tries to connect two dots with a straight line, and diplomat who has to connect many lines in order to connect A to B. That's just probably simplification. And I will now finish with this for the we introduce discussion. These days, I'm quite involved in AI discussion and trying to reduce smoke screens that exist all over the place. What is AI? And one of the elements is this simple pyramid, where do you regulate AI? Computational power, data, algorithms, or apps? And what type of risk you regulate? Is it risk of long-termism? It's a mid-term risk of monopolies, or it's short-term risk, fake news and everything that is happening. I think this dynamic, this Venn diagrams is extremely important. And we will start, and I will start with the Anita, you on this point. By discussing this diagram recently, she came and said, hey, we need a course about future. And don't worry, it won't be a philosophical discussion. And we are preparing the course on the future, because future is all over the place. And as we know, who controls the future controls present. It's from all ideologies, good and bad, throughout the history. And there are movements like long-termism and other movements which are basically build around AI. Therefore, we'll get back to you. Quick reflection, Nita, from you on the future. What you can tell us, because the session is about the future, and just few points what we should discuss. Who controls the future?
Yes, that's actually what I'm researching, who controls the future. And so about the future is not just happening, it is built. So it's emergent future. So I also like the term emergent technologies, because technologies that are emerging also showing us in which future we are heading. And I'm researching the topic metaverse in its widest definition. Because when you look at the visions of the companies who are building on this vision, then you can see in which future we are heading. And the reason why I do this is actually when we talk about digital transformation, we need to look at what are our living conditions now and how do they change because of these emerging technologies, because of these visions that are built and realized. And when we can identify this new environment, then only then we can make laws that are predictive actually and can help us solve problems before they occur, as we heard today from Xi. Solve a problem before it occurs. That's the best way.
Anita, today we had tough discussion during lunch, yes, if it can work, but we'll leave also to our panelists to see how it can work, what we can predict. And based on your really vast experience from different wearing various hats, what are we going to do with the future?
I would say go and run and flee and hide in a bunker, but proactively, let's think slightly more positively. Yes, as Jovan's just said, I have a very weird and eclectic past, starting my working life as an MI5 intelligence officer looking at terrorism, political dissidents. And then I was involved in quite a high-profile whistleblowing case when my colleague and partner went public. This is all a very long time ago, a quarter of a century ago. But because of those experiences, that got me very interested in a lot of interrelating issues. One is how media can be controlled and manipulated. Another one is why privacy is so damned important as a human right. Because having lived as someone who was on the wrong side of the law for a bit, as a whistleblower, feeling that I was being surveyed all the time, it made it very difficult to live as a human being, to have normal family communications, and also makes you very aware and very paranoid about how you can be spied on. So these are two lessons that I've brought forward over the last 25 years, along with a passion for open source software as a vague protection against some of these predations, and in some of the other areas in which I work, one of which is called the World Ethical Data Foundation, where we develop tools that can indeed future-proof some of our tech, and also pulling together an event every year and a half or so called the World Ethical Data Forum. So beware at the drinks party afterwards. I shall come headhunting for speakers for that, because the next one's next year. But what we're trying to do is mix up all these ideas and yank people out of their comfort zones. Stop them thinking, I'm cybersecurity, I'm InfoSec, I'm a diplomat, I'm an academic, and get them meeting people they would not normally have the chance to meet, and discussing all sorts of issues with people around the planet, coming from all sorts of cultures and legal structures, who wouldn't normally have that chance to discuss these ideas and try and synthesize a lot of the ideas and learn from previous mistakes and begin to try and formulate ways going forward. So there is no easy answer. I am definitely trapped in an Escher picture, going up, going down, whatever it is. But I do have a certain degree of hope in the goodwill, I think is the best way of putting it, of most people around the planet. They want to preserve basic human rights for themselves, for their families, for their children, for their communities and their societies, and their very governmental structures. And this is precisely why I feel so passionately that tech, we have to get right moving forward, particularly with the emergent technologies, as you mentioned, be it AI, be it generative AI, be it quantum going forward when it comes to security and privacy, everything online. And God knows what else is going to be around the corner. So long as we apply the basic principles, from my perspective, that is things like privacy, so that we can conduct our human lives in a different environment, which is technological, then at least we have a fighting chance, I think, of preserving what we feel is important for ourselves and our families and our communities. So that would be my advice, looking at what technologies absolutely enhance that or have the chance of enhancing that.
And you moved from the bunker to the lighthouse. That is really great. Thank you for this positive note. But you're putting you passed through that controversy in your career with the whistleblower, but now with open source, I'm sure there will be controversial discussion in the room these days, especially around AI. But thank you for that lovely intro. Mokhtar, future and discussion that we had during the lunch about norms, rules, what type of norms and rules we can establish. Can you follow the Anita suggestion that we predict and we establish rules and norms? You're coming from the policy context in which different norms have also development component. Therefore, you are in the middle of many Escher's pictures. Let us start making some sort of sense about the future norms and regulation.
Thank you, Jovan. Thank you for the question, and thank you for having me here. First of all, the future is already here. It's just we haven't apprehended very well. We have not been able to explain it or to comprehensive very well. So the future is already here. We need to think about something that is not a future. If you see what is happening now with the emerging technologies, with the combination of Internet of Things, fast computers, artificial intelligence, we found out that Terminator is not anymore a fiction story. So I'll be back? No, we are already there. It's not happening. Recently, 2 machines start learning languages between them without being told to do so. And we still haven't grasped why and how this happened. If you want to say about something about norms and the regulations, you need to think about space, where you apply those norms and regulations. And then the subject for which you have making those rules and norms. With regard to the space, we are talking today about cyberspace. Some say it doesn't exist. Some have a specific definition for that. Some say it is in your pocket, anywhere, but we argue. We need to know what is the space in which we are applying those rules. Subject now is not anymore the human being behavior. We need to know how machines are behaving, to regulate that, to put the norms. So the feature of legal and the feature of a norm and normality is something that has to be really redefined and reconsidered in the new context. Bottom line, we need to put a very strong wall between what these emerging technologies are bringing in good, the good thing that they are bringing, and the enormous bad thing that they can bring. That wall is extremely important, and that only human beings, we can do that by not only following specific rule, but following the sense of safety, justice, and fairness. Extremely important. Somebody will say it's just a speech now. But if we don't have that sense of grasping today what is good and what is bad, we'll not be able to have those norms and regulations as appropriate.
Thank you, Mokhtar. We had discussion if the cyberspace exists during the lunch, but we decided not to open this discussion because I'm proponent that it doesn't exist. And I was in almost minority. There was somebody who supported me. But I said, we leave it for the Diplo evening with a couple of glasses of wine, and we discuss if the cyberspace exists or not. And it's an interesting debate with numerous ramifications. Now, one question. This morning, we heard a few lines of thought. One line of thought is, hey, we spent 25 years negotiating this cybersecurity. It is slow. Law of the Sea Convention was negotiated, the codification also for more than a decade, and the other things. Can we afford to negotiate AI for the next 15 or 20 years? Then somebody, which was interesting, I think our colleague from the Netherlands, from Denmark, said very interesting point, The due diligence concept was set in Alabama case. By the way, if you have a time, if you go to Old Town, there is Alabama Room, the place where Alabama arbitration, the first international arbitration was concluded in the old town. This really nice walk if you have extra day. And then you have the Hague Conventions. And now we are coming and basically derogating this. This is a bit counter argument to the argument that of speed and that we cannot reuse the old elements. I would say I'm more, as a historian also, I'm more on these lines that we have instruments, historical instruments that we may carefully reuse. But the problem is today, 25 years, so many norms, no more cybersecurity, and we are on the eve of another tsunami, if I can call it, already with 1,000 AI ethical regulation rules. I don't know what is the situation in metaverse, but I guess the same. And whole confusion. What are we going to do? How are we going to deal? What we can learn, let's say, from the Geneva Manual or from cybersecurity in order to do it. Can we apply what Anita said, that we anticipate and regulate? Is it the solution in the spaces?
No. Let me just tell you something. We cannot afford ourselves to spend 25 years negotiating something. That is not really the way the humanity should evolve. And by the way, even before we start, the first conference I think in AI stay in London a few months ago, and right away, other countries are starting doing their own conferences also on AI,
it's topic.
We start already controversy, and again, how can I tell you? We start racing for something that is probably better. Have a compromise on it rather than start to racing for cyber influence. What's happening today is that this space on which we are evolving, all of us, geopolitically is kind of making things very difficult. People have raced for dominance in the land, then in the maritime space, then the space, and now this new space, what you call it, cyberspace or artificial intelligence space, you name it, whatever you call it, this new space is creating another competition that also creates another kind of Cold War. Be it at the level of technology or be it on anything else, competition is a problem that we are having. We need to stop that. So it's not time for negotiation. We need to, as I said, my appeal was, let's abandon that principle of dominance on any of the space and look what is actually good for all of us. That then you're optimistically or utopic, I don't know what you will define that, but the thing is, we need to start quickly and faster, put some rules that we all agreed upon to save the future of humanity.
Let's come on this, but Amy, please.
No, I just wanted to make a point picking up on that. Who is going to decide what's best for us? Because from my perspective, as a Brit, I've grown up in the West in an era of peace where we've had human rights enshrined in international and national laws. But different cultures are going to have different traditions. And tech is without borders, as I think was mentioned this morning. So, and it is very much a competitive environment where it's, I suppose market forces would be one way of putting it, which is a very Western concept too, which evolves the business models that develop the tech. So this is an incredibly nuanced and very difficult area to try and unpick. And I think going back to the first principles, and it was mentioned this morning, I think, by our Danish friend, the idea that there are already laws in place for other aspects of our lives, we should just apply those to our lives online. We don't have to reinvent the wheel every time we get a new piece of technology. If we have agreed globally on certain prime principles, let's apply those prime principles to our lives in this new environment. That would be the simplest thing, so we can avoid the 25 years of negotiation and fighting while tech just races ahead.
And just one question here, both to Mokhtar and you. I slightly, you can keep the mic. I slightly disagree. Let me bring a bit of disagreement with Mokhtar that there is geopolitical tension. If you follow San Francisco communique between China and the United States, one area of convergence is tech AI regulation. Therefore, there is an element where we are having different type of challenges that we are facing. Geopolitics exists; it's given. But my point is, can we learn something from cybersecurity or Geneva Manual process to regulate AI? Let's imagine we are locked in this room. Hopefully not. There is another whatever epidemics, and they gave us the task, guys. Forget any geopolitics. We want from you to draft a regulation on artificial intelligence and get out. They did on few occasions in history of international relations, including Dayton. We come after 1 month and we want a deal. That's an interesting issue also, how to do it.
You see, first of all, agreements or the communique doesn't say anything specific. The San Francisco communique, where still the cheap war still ongoing.
Yeah, cheap war.
So if that is not solved, nothing can be solved, right? Isn't it? Yeah, you understand that, right? If that is not stopped, and by the way, I don't know who is winning that war at all, because the purpose of making those people not able to do those chiefs are making them stronger, because it didn't kill them. It makes them stronger, and they are coming stronger. That's why China has now most of the 60% of the artificial intelligence is being actually developed in China.
You mean patents?
Well, I mean, the whole market in technology is being 60% of it is actually estimated to be in China, while the 40% is distributed between the United States and the rest of the world. While we don't talk about Africa at all in developing countries, they are not part of this, right? And though we will be affected, all of us, by that. What we have learned from the process of the Geneva is something very important. We don't need to go more than 25 years to doing the same thing. That is the first lesson. We have now the rules, we have the principles. Let's apply them, and as she suggested, probably one of the things is to go what is online is applicable on offline. That's all.
Then when we conclude this session, go for a drink and go for reception.
No, if you ask it as either, I have to answer to the question you have said with regard to, if you look us down here and ask us to draft the strategy, right? I will bring DiploFoundation method. I bring my artificial intelligence, take all the documents, and within 1 hour we have your strategy.
And go for a drink.
And go for a drink. Everything now, you see, this is where I'm calling about us to reasoning things. We are called for laziness. Everything we do now is being done for us by emerging technologies. And at the end, you find out the human brains are not functioning properly as they have been. You don't write speech anymore. You don't think. You just say, I want to speech on DiploFoundation, or write a report on DiploFoundation, and GPT-4 do that for you, etc. And you find it everywhere. Surgery operations done by artificial intelligence, etc. Where is now the new role of human beings? That new role is the thing we have to think of. We have done many things, but the things about us, we haven't done it. Is that clear for you?
It's completely clear.
Thank you.
And I even propose the human rights for be humanly imperfect, because we have to be imperfect a bit. This is beauty of human beings. But let's bring closer.
Can I just ask one very
Amita.
quick question
Yes.
of Anita, actually?
It's lovely moderating across.
Sorry, no, interaction. No, I'm just thinking about the comments that we've both made about having all the laws in place for real world things, whether they are applicable, whether they can be applied properly, implemented properly or not, is a completely different debate. But how does this impact on the metaverse as it's evolving?
So for me, there is no difference between the digital world and the real world. So for me, this is all reality. And we just need to adapt it. And this is why we need to have a close look at how do we need to adapt it. So what is different? Can I come back to your example that we are locked in here? What we did actually was we made a simulation. We were all embodying different roles, and then imagining in these roles what we would do, what we should not do in these cases. So, and simulations are a way of, it's a method to find solutions. So I want to talk about methods, not about a solution, but really about the method, how to find a solution. And to me, if we want to keep up with progress, we need to use progress. So my suggestion would be to have a look at what is the industry doing extremely successfully, where are they putting all their money, and then I would do the same. And where I see their money is going is digital twin technology.
Could you explain this?
Sure. So a digital twin is a digital replica of an existing entity, an asset. So that can be a car, a building, a factory, or a process, so something that is not tangible. The very special thing is about a digital twin that it is connected with the existing twin. There is a real-time exchange of data which affects both sides. So this is the big step compared to normal simulations, which of course also makes it extremely dangerous because you have the effect on both sides. So currently, ETH Zurich is building a digital twin of Earth for, I think, for Europe in the Horizon program. We have NVIDIA building it for the US, and we have the colleagues, the experts in CERN, building a prototype of a digital twin engine, and now I quote, to connect the galaxies of sciences. So where is the law?
But Anita, one question. Let's say, what would be digital twin of today's meeting?
We would need to feed the model. For example, if we take it, that's a bit difficult. So if we
find some other simpler example. Just to illustrate.
No, I can use, let's take the Geneva Dialogue. The Geneva Dialogue, let's say, is a project. So you would try to translate this project into a digital twin technology. So you need a model. So we have here a mathematician, Igor. So we would need men like you, or people like you. And from this we go. So I'm not a technician. I'm not an expert for digital twins. But this is the nice thing about it, being an independent researcher. I can have a look at maybe ways of doing things that are not obvious mainstream. So kind of think out of the box and then play with it. And this is not so absurd because, for example, project design, I read it's already used. But it's quite demanding to really then make such a detailed example.
Let's develop this argument. I think it's a lovely argument of, we are getting to the method. We are not saying what should be regulation of metaverse or AI or this, we are getting to the method. And Emmy, you are passionate supporter of open source in general and AI. What would be this digital twin simulation exercise which would resolve problem of a debate about, let's say, open source AI, which is a big issue, as you know, and how would you reflect different views in this room? I guess there are definitely, since quite a few are coming from security community, this community tends to be a bit cautious about open source software. How would you replicate that Anita's method and make us resolve the problem by having digital twins, or at least have method to discuss?
Back to Escher. So I mentioned that I work with an organization called the World Ethical Data Foundation. And one of the projects it's been working on over the last few months is something that's been announced and has garnered quite a lot of media coverage over the last few months, which is called the Open Standard for Responsible AI. And this is a group of like-minded organizations and tech people coming together to try and do this, pull together these sort of structure to make people think about the implications of their applications as they build them. But going back to the first principle bit, when it comes to if we were to build this sort of locked virtual room, from my background and perspective, and the reason why I'm so into things like open source tech, is I'm allergic to some of the closed proprietary software because you just don't know what's going into it and who has access to it. Now, I say this as someone with an intelligence background. So what are the threats to tech, who can get access to it, who owns the hardware, who owns the infrastructure down which the information is sent, and who controls the software which manages the information, our data, our very lives online, going back to this point. So if we were to build this virtual room, which company, for example, is going to host it? Or would it be an open source community that builds it? So we might feel that inherently, one, it might be more vulnerable, or two, we might have more trust in it to join it without feeling like we might be owned, therefore, by the proprietary software that is hosting us. Who would have access to it? What are the back doors? And this, again, is another point why I like the open source model, in the sense that theoretically and largely practically over decades now, we've had a situation where, because they are volunteers and they can see the vulnerabilities being built into a system, they can patch it immediately. And we know, going back to Edward Snowden, which was a decade ago when he blew the whistle on the NSA, the interlinkage between the state level actors and corporations. I think the corporations were unwittingly predated on with a program called PRISM, but it allowed backdoors into a lot of the big tech giants that control our software and our data and the free flow of our information. So with all these vulnerabilities in the back of my mind, I would say, yeah, I would have questions about who's going to build that virtual room, who would host it, and who would have access to it. And also, if there are vulnerabilities because of that access, be it state or whatever, that means there are vulnerabilities which would allow criminals and hackers in too. So I think these are, the two big threats for our lives online is increasingly Orwellian, potentially type state scenario. And because the vulnerabilities are there to be used by these sort of players, then you might end up with the criminals and hackers also using those vulnerabilities. So that'd be my very first question. Who's going to host it? Where are we going to find ourselves? And who's going to own our data as we do it?
I think our digital twin is getting a shape from the, let's say, use Geneva manual and dialogue to create something for AI and metaverse. Nobody is sleeping, let me see. No, some are browsing the net, probably not nice restaurants for this evening, but we're sort of supervising communication. Now, just one illustration, what you just said, and then we'll pass to Mokhtar and others for comments. There was one article which is completely came unnoticed in Wired, that two American scientists created for UNDP AI platform to monitor Palestinian-Israeli conflict before the 7th October. And there was an interesting discussion. UNDP then was asked to answer. They didn't answer anything. But it raised the question that you opened, which I think it will be a big issue for the UN. Who can develop AI system for the UN? Should it be open source? How to trust? It's not anymore, let's say we have Microsoft providing whatever, Excel, Word, or whatever, Google or whatever companies are. This is a passive. But if you are asking AI system to suggest you how to deal, in this case, with a very, very, very tragic Israel-Palestinian conflict, or any other conflict, how member states can rely on that? Is this what you ask, who is owning it, how is it developed, and should it be open source? Should we advise UN to develop open source AI platform? It's a question also for all of us. And we are not speaking about something abstract. I'm sure it is going in next 2 to 3 years' time in the General Assembly discussion. Because once one proprietary software is used, some country will ask, okay, how can you ensure impartiality of their advices? Over to you and Mokhtar, then. Mokhtar, that could apply to African Union and other players. What would be your suggestion on this? Is it open source solution?
My suggestion, not use AI for that. Simply.
Well, member states are asking, want a reduction of spending in the UN, in African Union. They're using back home in their governments and say, guys, why you don't use AI also to reduce the...
I believe
that will come.
Yeah, there is some areas they still need to be under the human control. Ethically and strategically, AI should not be. That's why I said we need to create that wall between what is actually should be done using a new technology and what should not be done using that. human being will need to leave its space. Some decisions need to be taken by humans, not by machines. So analysis, opinions, decision-making on a critical situation, I believe, where there is, it's not 1-0 or wrong or right. Where there is a gray areas, only human being can decide on that. So I wouldn't advise for decision-making process based on discussions and that involve human beings and future and so on, to leave it in the hands of machines. My example of the two machines talking about them without being to do so, I didn't throw it that way because I am afraid that by what is machine learning is basically getting more data and getting used to something and be able to replace you. So what if tomorrow we are not being replaced by those machines because we give them too much responsibilities? We teach them too much, they know too much. And I said, we are called for laziness. There is a lot of things we don't do anymore. Even looking at the word, is it is rightly or wrongly spelled, if you play Scrabble with your kids, you see that you don't know anything. Simply because you're used to the computer correcting everything for you. That is the danger. This is probably somebody said there's nothing, but if you look at the small observations of how our behavior is being changed by services being offered to us by emerging technologies, you find yourself that you are losing it.
And Mokhtar, one question here, 2 points, but on this point.
Yes.
One very, very simple question. I think we should, but can we stop that? That's a realistic question. I understand human-centered approach, we have to, but there is a serious question. Let's say on the level of efficiency, which is the pillar of our society, to be efficient, AI is more efficient and we are losing this game. And that's the point. But what I like in your point is extremely important. You say it's not binary, it's not black and white. There are gray zones. Can we dig a bit on the gray zones trade-off, compromise, fast, agile decision making? In that gray zone, we had example with your tie during the lunch. In that gray zone,
leave alone my tie.
Yeah, we will remove the tie completely.
Yes.
But in that gray zone, there is probably some method that we can develop. Could you reflect on that?
Yes. You see, the more you push, you reduce the gray zone area. The more you are becoming, how can I say, enslaved by that. That gray area should be untouched. To me, that's my opinion. Maybe somebody
should be preserved.
Should be preserved for human to decide on that.
Okay.
It's not to touch. It's not to be touched at all. That is my opinion, but I don't know how other people will think about it. Some people will think that everything is right, wrong, etc. A is B, etc. Street thinking, probably. But my opinion personally is we don't, again, the Terminator is no more a fiction. Is reality.
It's efficient in killing us.
Come again?
It is efficient in killing us.
Well,
no,
I live with that.
But let's on this point. Therefore, Mokhtar is arguing, and I will open for discussion. Forget binary, forget my opinion and wrong opinion. Preserve that gray zone for compromise, trade-off, discussions, and this is our very human. We have a comment from the Jan or from Denmark, and then we'll return to Amy and Anita for that fine-tuning this element of method.
To the points you talked about with the AI in warfighting, because we have a real-life example illustrating the points that you've raised. I mean, the Israeli gospel software that is used for target creation and selection in the ongoing Gaza campaign, where before they had trouble finding worthwhile targets in this urban warren, and now you have an AI that is watching the lives of mid-level Hamas leaders on social media, on whatever apps or surveillance satellites they can find, so they can be proposed as targets. And the dynamic we're seeing from the latest leaks we have is that they fulfill the letter of the law. There is a human that approves the target. It is always suggested to a human, but the human is under pressure to provide targets. And the human is not rewarded for saying, well, we were suggested 50 targets, but we actually did a deep investigation of these targets over several days, and we found there is some doubt. You don't, in this present situation, you don't get a reward for that. So the pressure on the human is to just approve what the machine says, and that this becomes the expected norm. And so that is the kind of thing we have to build norms for that deal with both the technology and sort of the way human organizations work under pressure.
Jan, you're on the Mokhtar side. Let's preserve that substantively, that gray space for us, and not de facto push us against the wall and press the button which is advised. That's more or less your view. Let's hear Emi and Anita on that, and then we'll open for discussion. But let me summarize where we are going. We started with the future. We moved with the discussion and trying to see what we can learn from the past. And we opened this debate that we need to preserve some space for us, for compromise, trade-off, discussion, negotiation, diplomacy, name it, in what mediation, whatever. Jan's comment is, no, it doesn't work now because we are forced that the gray space doesn't exist de facto. Maybe de jure exists, but de facto doesn't exist. What is your, Emi and Anita, view on that?
I'm very much in the gray space too. And thinking about Terminator, because I think you've mentioned it a couple of times now, of course, the third Terminator film has Skynet taking over, which is effectively AI taking control and just deciding to wipe out humans. Anyway, that is supposedly sci-fi, of course. I want to go back to the human decision-making process, though, because this is a hot topic when it comes to warfare, in terms of drone warfare. Are we going to allow these drones to have autonomy to kill human beings or not? At the moment, there's still the human aspect, as you mentioned, although the targets might be just kill, 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 because that's what the machine tells me. So do we want machines to have that sort of power to target someone and kill them, and there's no human interaction? Do we want the leaders of our countries to have the power, to hand over the power to launch a nuclear strike, rather than having the leader of the country make that final decision, that final human decision? And just one final point on this, in terms of the grey area, and I'm old enough to remember the Cold War and the sort of paranoia growing up in the 1980s about, there could be sort of mutually assured destruction and all that sort of thing. There was a very famous case, I think it was in 1983, where all the instruments of a Russian commander's submarine, nuclear submarine, were indicating that the West had launched a nuclear strike. And so everything he'd been trained to do was saying, launch a retaliatory strike. And it turned,
Sergei Petrov.
That's it. And it turned out it was a machine error. And because he had that human intuition that he could still feed into the system, he averted a nuclear confrontation. So yes, this aspect, this ethical discussion that we are continuing to have around how much control do we abrogate to machines or AI or quantum or whatever it's going to be in the future, we as humans need to be very much on top of that. And this is precisely what we do at WEDF, for example. And I'm very pleased that we've had the chance to discuss it today as well.
Thank you, Emi. Anita, now you started you put us in trouble with the digital twins. You have now to get us out. Would the digital twins be able to reflect this?
It would help us with the discussion, to find pros and cons, and maybe to get, to find actually this gray area, I guess. So just to bring in, I want to come back to our simulation today. So in my group with XI, we were representing in the first case the cybersecurity researcher. And what we discussed was, if there is a system that allows us to do the right thing, it's a very different story. So what I see, for example, when I talk to people who produce extended reality devices, there is either no awareness for risk, or there is awareness, but they say, oh, come on, but I'm not doing this. I'm just providing this service. And well, your data are then out there and anybody could now do a deepfake with you, but I'm not doing this. So I think to avoid such a dystopian future, we have to enable people to do the right thing. This is why I actually find that the Geneva Manual is fantastic. I personally think then the next step is not to find solutions, but to find the right tool to really deal with the complexity. And this is where my idea would be this digital twin technology. It could be something else. Maybe this is completely wrong. I don't know. It's just a way of starting thinking of a new tool to use.
Anita, I think that we have the few metaphors, the gray zones from Emmy, from now, from you. You basically don't focus on solutions. Solution will come. We need the tools and methods and ways and smarter thinking, and we'll make solutions which will have any way to change very fast. Absolutely. Through the feedback loop or something like this. We have a question, Vlada was pointing, and we have then hand question from the audience, I guess, and then back. But Vlada told me, well, he disappeared. Audience?
Remote space, we had Rosalia, who mentioned, it was interesting, she said, it's so easy to respond to all these questions. The one thing is certain we have to act now. But she said one way could be the shift of the educational paradigm. So to teach human rights data protection as part of computer science, and to teach human rights as part of cybersecurity, and cybersecurity as part of social sciences. So putting all of that down to the educational level and raising awareness from the bottom of the future generations, but all the emerging risks of the technology.
Great comment. Just good news, Rosalia. In the United States, at the STEM faculties, they started making Frankenstein book by Mary Shelley, compulsory reading, annotated. And I advise, I will send the link. There is annotated for scientists and computer specialists, Mary Shelley, because the story is the same. Dr. Frankenstein wanted to create something, and then he created, the whole narrative. But I think that's a great point. Well, it will take some time to educate next generation, but we should start now, and maybe the results will be happening soon. And then we have a question from the audience.
Let's stay with medicine. I heard a suggestion from Professor Knox from New Zealand. And he actually said, when you bring a product into the world, like an AI system, you should at the same time kind of provide the counter product. So like, if you say, I have a poison, you have to bring the counter poison.
Okay, yeah. That's a great idea. Then we have comments there, hands, how many hands? Okay, few hands. Let's start with.
Okay, hi, I'm Chris Buckridge, speaking very much in my personal capacity, particularly given what I'm going to say. First, one point just in relation to, you mentioned Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, Jovan. There was a very interesting thing I was reading today about a group that's looking at economic solutions proposed in science fiction. And they've been speaking at the COP28. And it's actually interesting that to sort of think about the role that science fiction can play in helping us to think through previously unthought situations. What I wanted to say was a bit in response both to, I think, Mokhtar, your point about the human role in diplomacy and what AI can do. And I think, Annie, you were also talking about it in relation to the nuclear sub-situation. And I think one thing I'm wary of, and I'd be curious to get your reaction, is a sort of chauvinism about the supremacy of human intuition or human agency in these sort of areas, and whether, yes, AI now is not sufficient to take on that role or supersede that role, but that can change. Things are developing. And so is that perhaps something we need to be a little wary of in considering how we respond to the role that AI might have and how we regulate that?
One question, human chauvinism, let's say AI chauvinism, human chauvinism as a misconception, our naivety, or the wrong concept? We should not have the primary role in the universe. Two potential sub-questions.
I think the first one was more what I was thinking.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. We have then few hands, Ima, and then we'll come to Kate, and then on the other side. Let's finish this side, but you are taking a mental note of the questions?
Trying to. I'd prefer just to answer that, actually, to begin with, and then move between.
Imad is...
Okay. Imad Ad from Center for Digital Trust at EPFL. I'm not talking about AI, I'm not talking about future, but something very similar that happened a few weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, I was reading about China, their technology that downloads 150 movies in a single second, and it's 3 times faster than the fastest ever link that we ever have. That's fantastic. In the same week, I was reading a report that says that 73% of the traffic of the internet is used for malicious purposes. Combine both, this is horrific. That means in the future, we are making technologies that is more advantageous to the criminals than to the good people. It's like currently you have a highway with 3 lanes. 2 of them are used by criminals to run fast. And then you decide to triple the size of this highway and give them 6 tracks out of 9 tracks. That's, in the physical world, that's stupid. If we map it to the internet, we accept it. And it's a fact that, okay, some company creates a technology, somebody else deploys this technology and duplicates it everywhere, and there's no single entity that will tell us, that will tell them, hey, globally, this is not optimal. You are optimizing locally for your technology, you are optimizing another company, optimizing its distribution, but in fact, after all, it's the criminals that are taking advantage of it. This is very hard to regulate. There's no, everyone is in a silo, optimizing on his own, and there's nobody telling him, hey, wait until we finish criminality and then we duplicate the lanes, right?
Any solution, Imad?
No.
Thank you, welcome to the club. Kat, you have solution, I'm sure.
Of course. Okay, so thank you very much. Very interesting. I think what we're protecting is not survival, it is lifestyles. And there's at least 30% of the world's population to which this does not even apply, because we haven't even solved the most basic of the problems, and we also have no intention of doing so. Because we're quite comfortable with the status quo, and all these defensive arguments are about defending our own prosperity and our own lifestyles and making sure that we enjoy the same or better standard of living. But there are things I've been writing. Perhaps what we need is a new definition of intelligence, because the intelligence that is worrying us is one that I would call not artificial intelligence, but synthetic intelligence. Because
What is synthetic?
it is synthesized, yeah, we pick data, we put it into a model and we synthesize an answer. And unfortunately, we've been calling this intelligence in human beings for a long time. But when I saw machines do it, I thought maybe I'm not so intelligent. I was just in a system which was very good at measuring synthetic intelligence. And therefore, I misclassified myself as an intelligent person. But now ChatGPT and all the others have shown that I'm not. I think the real problem with human beings is not synthetic, and we shouldn't even be worrying about whether machines now have very good synthetic intelligence. It is moral intelligence that's the problem. And there I agree with Chris that I don't even know why we're allowing the human beings to make the decisions, because they do not have good moral intelligence either. And perhaps this is the intelligence that we should be working on to help us to solve the real problems and to do the right thing.
Completely the left side of the discussion, right, whatever it is, and then we move to the other side of the...
Thank you. No, I just wanted to react to some arguments that have been made about the legal side. Do we need new laws? And I completely agree, we do not have to develop new laws each time there is a new technology. The UN Charter doesn't have to be written each time there is a new technology, because it regulates the relationship between states. The question is, what is use of force, for example, in cyberspace? How do you define that? So these things we have to address. But the approach taken is technology neutral. We do not regulate on the technology, but how to use it. I think we should continue that. But that is one point I want to make. And then that's for international law. I don't say we do not need other laws, maybe on the national level, or depending on how the technology is used. And there, I think it depends really on the level we're discussing. We will have to see. The same goes for AI and human control. I think I completely agree. There should be human control in the end and decision making, but also there, I think it depends, what are we talking about? Are there very simple tasks that AI is doing for us, where it's not very important that a human in the end takes a decision or makes a decision? Or as closer as we get to implications for human beings, be it for their life, for their human rights and so on, the more and more it gets important that the human takes the decision in the end. Maybe just to react to the example from warfare, there is a GGE also, UN GGE, dealing with these lethal autonomous weapon systems. And the consensus, more or less, is there needs to be human control always in the end, if there are systems like that that are used. And especially modern armies, they don't only have these decision target sheets, and even if they use AI, as now the Israeli, as has been mentioned, they also have legal advisors in the process. And there might be pressure on people that they take a decision to kill as many as possible. But that is in the end more a moral question, ethical question, a political question, how to deal with that. Because the law is the same. International law hasn't changed. Even the Geneva Convention still apply, and the protocols. You always have to make the distinction. You always have to take precautions and to take into account possible collateral damage. So I just wanted to bring that into the discussion.
Let us just quickly summarize before we move. Thank you for this clarification. Very, very rich point. First, Chris started, hey, are we a bit arrogant with our intuition? Can it really solve the problems? I would push back, but we'll do it during the Diplo dinner or evening. I think we should preserve something for us, even if we are imperfect, but it's a very valid point. Then Imad pointed to the concept of progress, or so far, the narrative was, progress will ultimately, through invisible hand, solve the problems of 3 lines. Yes, let's put 5 lines, and down the line, there will be more good lines than bad lines, which is very naive view. We are realizing that it's naive. And then, Kat, you brought and then we'll ask our panelists to comment, and you brought the question of, the question of development, to keep it the perspective, people who are out of the current dilemmas, what we are discussing, and question of the moral intelligence, which is, and then you help us to anchor it in the legal question. You left it for probably some future international criminal court to judge what is the application of these decisions, but there are rules. But some court in the future, national, international, will have to judge if in particular case, in any conflict, the rules were properly applied of humanitarian law and other things. But I think it was useful anchoring of our discussion into legal elements. Now I'm returning to our panel, and then we will move to the other side of house. There are many questions. Anita, would you like to start?
Yes. I would like to pick up the topic of morality, actually. In legal tech, there is the hope that technology could replace bias in judges, for example. So that's the hope, because humans are also biased. Technology is, as we know, also biased because it's fed by the data of humans. And we humans, unfortunately, we are so easily cajoled by language. I must say, I never expected what happened when OpenAI released, it was released much earlier, but ChatGPT and DALL-E 2 then to the public. I knew it already. Researchers in the metaverse already were talking about it. So I never expected that this would have such a deep impact. So it's, I think, really about teaching people. And just, I'm not scared of the Terminator scenario that the machines take over. So when I follow like leading specialists like Jan Likan, it does not sound that we are so close to it. So I think we still have time to intervene and make sure that these systems are not built this way. At least that's what I hope.
Moral intuition, not naively thinking that bias exists on both sides, but maybe we have a right to be biased and machine doesn't have a right. Emmy, your point, comment on any point from this side of the chamber, let's say left and right. Please.
Just maybe we need a little bias to survive.
Okay, good. Imperfection.
I would like to pick up on the moral thing as well, because I think that's absolutely fascinating. Both from the sci-fi perspective, I love that point from the back of the room, because I'm a complete sci-fi nut myself and can see all sorts of interesting extrapolations there. But yes, these new technologies are only as good as they are programmed to be, and they are programmed by humans who are fallible. So in terms of what weaponry might be able to do in the future, what scares me about AI is a lot of the groundbreaking research tends to come out of the military. So if it's programmed by those people coming out of that environment, we could be looking at some serious ethical issues going forward. So the question here really, is it Catherine? Kate, yes. Is it moral or is it an ethical debate that we need to have? Is it an educational debate, inculcating youngsters with these sort of notions of human rights or legalities or ethics as they go into this line of work, I think is important. Because again, picking up on the second question about criminality, and I think it was 73% of, is the internet being used for criminal purposes? That does not surprise me, again, because as soon as you have a powerful new tool, criminals are going to use and abuse it, just like the Tommy gun, in the 1920s gangster films or something. So it does go back to education, it goes back to tech law, it goes back to an ethical and moral framework. And I think going forward, looking at our future with how AI could develop, how quantum computing could be used or abused, and whatever else comes afterwards, these always come back to the very fundamentals. What makes us human? How do we safeguard our humanity, and how do we build and preserve that humanity? And this takes me back always to the ethical or moral question, and that would be, I think, my overarching answer to all of those questions.
No, lovely summary. Mokhtar, and then we have about 10 minutes. We'll move to the other side of the chamber and see what are the whatever left wing or right wing, if there are these divisions anymore in the world of politics.
I will make it very, very short. The ladies have spoken. So basically, I do agree on what I have said in responding to those questions. But let me just say two things very important. One is what makes the human being great is that resilience for seeking for power all the time. The love at that power. It's not really chauvinism. It's the love and the research for that dominance of things make the human being really very resilient to anything that has happened. The way it is happening today is not a standard of life, but what makes our life beauty is we cry in front of poverty and come back tomorrow and try to fight it. There will always something unfair here and there, injustice here and there, but fighting it all the time, thinking about it and coming back to it, that's sustainability of our way of preserving our kind, if that makes us really not going to the machines.
Great. Sustainability of preserving our kind. New element, 18th SDG. Now we move to the other side of chamber. Let's see what are the views here. You raised the hand. Well,
yeah, is it working? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Super. Camille Amdouni from the Cyberspace Institute. I just have a quick reflection, which is quite pragmatic and just not moral at all. It's more on the making regulation for emerging technologies. I mean, you've spoken earlier about the future is now, but it does feel that regulators have really an issue with the future in making, I think, appropriate regulation. We've seen it actually with the development of the EU AI Act, where we saw a huge lack of future-proof definition of artificial intelligence.
decisions. We've seen obviously the regulators going back to it on generative AI and sort of obviously amending language. So I think I'm seeing that now we're trying just to fit, circles into squares, and just that's not working. And I just want basically the panel to reflect on that, because I think you said we need to use progress to make regulations. I think earlier at lunch, you two had a bit of a debate about whether it is necessary to frame and define. So I'd love to, to bring that.
All discussion.
Sorry, I didn't know it was off the record, but just want to bring that back to the conversation because it was very interesting.
Thank you. I think very, very interesting point reflecting on our debate, but getting probably closer to this, what Mokhtar concluded, we need to revisit, sustainable discuss, and without going for the solution, which is solution. I won't use the other term.
Yeah, this is Martin speaking. Okay, I'm from Huawei industry perspective background. So my reflection is that I think there are three conclusions. Number one, I think I agree with this gentleman saying that technology is neutral. Yeah, this is the first one. Okay, you can use it as a tool to facilitate you, or you can use it as a weapon. Okay, to do bad things. How to use it? Okay, depends on the human. It's a sword that you can swing it. You can do it in a good way, or you can do it in a bad way. So this is number one. Number two, I want to, my reflection is that human control is not always optimal. It's not always perfect, okay? This is Catherine's point. Also, it is get my echo. Because, for example, we developed the automatic driving system in our car, and which is available to be automatic driving in China, okay? And we say that this is level 3.9, it's not level 4, because at the end, the human should do the final decision, okay? But there are some circumstances, okay, when you already identify in front of your car, there is an object which is very likely to be a human, and the human decide to press gas, acceleration, no matter it is because intentionally or unintentionally, we have to stop, okay? Because at that time, human action is not reliable. So because it will cause harm to another human, so we call this is the active safety functionality. So this time, human control is not perfect. We have to stop it. So then we come to the third point, okay? Third point is that if we already learn from past experience that in some circumstance, in some scenario, there are some laws, there are some, a code of conduct we should follow to prevent the damage, to reduce the harm. Then this law is something that we should accept it and implement it by everybody. And this is why we need to discuss about the law. And this law is actually, they are embedded, they are accumulated, the wisdom of human being collectively in the history. Okay, this is, I want to highlight number 3. And finally, as an industry-
3.5.
Yeah, really.
Please go ahead.
Finally, as an industry representative, I would like to say that previously, as an industry player, we are a little bit reluctant to regulations. We're always thinking that a regulation may slow down the innovation, lacking, binding your hands, so you cannot do here and there. But now we're changing the mind. We found that there are circumstances that really need regulation, together with the industry to solve the scenario, the problem that we found together. That's why, there is a book, by the way, from Microsoft, and we, from our side, we also study that carefully. This is which from Brand Smith, the book, the name of the book is Tool or Weapon. Okay, so it actually represents Microsoft's, his roadmap from reluctant to being regulated, become willing to cooperate with the regulation to move forward. This is the very important change. Okay, so from industrial point of view, we need to be more proactively under call for regulation, and this is good for everybody. Thank you.
This is a good point. We have now in EU AI Act, and we'll go then there, a paradoxical situation that France is asking arguing against regulation. France, in Europe, he was always asking for regulation, and the tech companies are asking for regulation. Probably the answer for the future discussion is what type of regulation?
Yes.
That's probably the type. And there was a question of neutrality. We have the question of and then you will the question of neutrality. I think your argument was that the law should be technologically neutral, but then there is discussion if technology is always neutral in a sense on its impact. But lovely points, and I think a long list for discussion in the continuation of a Geneva dialogue. And we have your comment, please.
Yeah, that's it. So thanks so much for the panel and thanks so much for the opportunity. I'm Manuel Gustavo Isaac, lecturer in the ethics of emerging tech at the FDFA. Well, one of the first classes we have is precisely about teaching students that tech is never neutral, basically because it's always embedded in anthropological, sociological, and so on context that's driven by different forces, and that also enables different kind of affordances and so on. So that's not neutral. So that's the basic point. But I would like to kind of press you on a few challenges that basically I'm kind of struggling with in my own kind of classes and teaching. So one of which is the kind of cultural shift that you need to kind of provide in kind of the students, basically kind of way of thinking. And that connects a bit with the AB slide. You had your one at the beginning of the presentation. It's not the same kind of way of addressing the problems always, and that's some sort of gap to bridge. That's not always easy to actually perform. And the other challenge is, well, basically, what are the incentives, both at the individual level, but at the structural level, be it of an institution such as the EPFL, for instance, but more generally in the industry as well, for those folks that are basically kind of designing, developing, and maybe deploying as well those systems to basically abide by some sort of normative consideration. What is the drive for them? What might be the traction for them to kind of get on board with this consideration in mind while they work on the product? So that's
great questions, and I think we will have now some answers here. One question: are you by any chance using, and this direct question, Mary Shelley's annotated Frankenstein as a compulsory reading at the course? That's probably could be suggestion for Swiss universities, all STEM universities, because Mary Shelley was written just across the lake in Villa Diodati in Geneva. We have Alabama, we have Villa Diodati. We have your question, and there was a hand raised there. I'm now in trouble with time management. Vlada is, his gaze is becoming a bit complex. Let's take two more questions, and then we'll get back to the panel for quick reflections. Please.
I just have some reflections that maybe is also to get more comments coming from the panel. I think the first point that I'd like to make is that AI is very attractive and seductive in that sense, to put a negative spin on it. And as we discussed earlier, maybe we might think about leaving lower cognitive actions and decisions for AI to do for us. But going back to Jan's point is, in a more cursory manner, for us humans to make complex decisions, we need training fields in the low cognitive band to then be prepared to come to that complex cognitive decision making.
What would be low cognitive band?
Simple things like what you should be eating today. Simple things like how do you actually
daily
navigate.
Things.
Yes.
Okay.
But if you neglect, much like how our mobile phones now, we hardly remember the 6, 7, 8, 9 digits that are close to us. We are not able to have that memory retention capability. That's a very bad example maybe, but if we allow low cognitive functions to be surrendered to technology, at some point in time when we arrive with a position that we need to make high complex cognitive decisions, we might be ill-equipped to do so, and therein lies the easiness for us to surrender that decision to what the technology is suggesting to us. And that's why I welcome the comments coming from the forum online to say that maybe one part of this upstream solution is then we educate upstream, because I reflected in many of our discussions in Geneva Dialogue that programmers, coders, developers are now writing law in technology without knowing the legal ramifications of what that is. Similar to how, from a technology standpoint, we write rules, the if then else statements. What do you allow into your network and what do you deny from entering into your network? Those are rules that you loosely can connect towards a legal framework. But they do not understand the ramifications of whether moral decisions that you need to make, whether geopolitical, and that's exactly to the point that was also highlighted. The complex A to B journey is not a straight line. But I'm also hopeful because the capacity of the young to take in new dimensions of consideration is actually very high. I reflect that they are sponges and they can take
more
in
optimistic note. Huh?
Yes. So that's my reflection, and I welcome any additional comments. I do have one last point, which is that when we talk about regulations, we talk about policy, and we talk about law, in the end, we need to regulate back to a natural being. That's how the law has been and will always be. I cannot fathom a position where I say I will punish the automatic vehicle, and the punishment is just destruction or turning it off. But is that the correct recourse and remedy to the harm that has been laid out to the victim?
You mean preventive function of law, not only
exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So both the preventive as well as the remedy aspect of the law will naturally go back to the human, a natural human being. And in that sense, then do we then pursue the pathway to say that, oh, it is the manufacturer and it is the mind of the manufacturer, which is the CEO or the chairman of the board, that is penalized for something that is very, very far down developed in a very large organization? So therein lies the complexity in this discussion that I thought helped to anchor it a bit.
Thank you. Just one small apology for the remote participants. As you can see, we have a bias. We are in the room and we have microphone control. Therefore, we ignore them a bit. Big apology for the remote participation community. We go to the last comment, and it's David is always the person who plays at the right time with right timing. CFI expert. I'm proud, my former student, cybersecurity expert who moved from political science to coding in Unix. David, as always, short comment from your side.
No. Just going back to science fiction again, I would suggest reading Isaac Asimov again, and maybe replacing robots and robotics by artificial general intelligence, because it's very interesting. Just to quote the first law that was published in 1942 in one of his science fiction books, I won't go through the three. So if we replace it in general artificial intelligence may not injure a human being or through inaction allow a human being to come to harm. That would be the first law. So I'd suggest you read Isaac Asimov, his three laws, in replacing robotics and robotic, and think about AI and general artificial intelligence in that sense.
Thank you, David. That's great point. Great point. Wow, so many great points. Vlada, are we recording this? Okay, thank you. You will have a summarized version by our AI system soon. Back to the output. There were so many threads. I feel like if we try knitting a metaphor, but what thread you would pick and try to close briefly, Mokhtar, and then we'll continue with our panelists.
No, I just will say two things. When we speak about cybersecurity, we say security by design. I would add something, responsibility by design. That's how we can continue our life.
Thank you.
Responsibility by design in anything we're doing.
Thank you. Cybersecurity responsibility by design.
I just want to pick up on the point about cognitive outsourcing, because I'm sure that humans had the same discussion 2,000-3,000 years ago when people started writing stuff down. It's like, we don't need to learn Homeric, the Odyssey or the Iliad anymore. We don't need to learn 1,000 lines off by heart because we can write them down and people can read them and it's much easier. So it's just another evolutionary step I think we're trying to adjust to. I think perhaps the difference is the speed of the evolution and the speed of the adoption, and also the inequalities which are thereby displayed in different regions of the world. who has access, who doesn't have access, that sort of thing. So there are all sorts of different subtle arguments to be teased out here. And I suppose my simple answer was always to go back to the basic ethical principles or the first laws of robotics.
Go back to Socrates Phaedrus and his dialogue about writing. Thank you, Amy, for bringing. Anita.
I would like to respond to the question about how to shift the mind by the colleague from EPFL, correct? Also, I make the experience with my metaverse workshop that people react in 3 ways. The first way is they are completely indifferent because what they hear is so far away from the reality, how they perceive it, that they cannot attach to it. The second reaction is aggression, because we are touching very fundamental questions of humanity. And the reactions is like really a stubborn no. Really, I had this reaction, just no, adult people, like a child actually. And the third reaction is usually people who are interested up to very fascinated, that are usually the people who are into science fiction. So what I do is I use the method of framing and really, so my audience is usually lawyers, and really try to figure out in the room, where is my anchor for whom? And by using frames, when people ask me questions, I can usually put them in the right frame, also consciously, and then as I say, okay, we are now in this frame, correct? Yes, and then we can talk.
Now I'm wondering in what frame I am in your system. Great. No, lovely conclusion. We move from the no, from aggression and no, to very constructive discussion. You stayed, you can see the gaze, people were following, nobody felt asleep. And we get back to the book that I have to return to the bar. We have many frames, and we have Escher's confusion. We are confused, I don't know, on higher and lower level, but we have the long list of issues, and we, I would say, dive deep into the quite a few issues and brush these issues. Obviously, we cannot boil the ocean, but we can start a long journey, to use the Chinese proverb or African proverb. If you want to go far, you go with the others. And I think we went quite far in many aspects, but there will be much more reframing in Escher's way. And I would like to thank, first to invite you to thank our panelists with applause. To thank you, Vlada, for tolerance, and I can see Nastya. First, you know how it works. First, Vlada acted, but Vlada is not tough one. And then Nastya over there in the corner started jumping, and I said, oh my God, I'm running, I'm in trouble. Thank you very much for the lovely session. Thank you.
To sort of stimulate our imagination of the future, we have a special guest, Dr. Cory Doctorow, who is joining online through Zoom. He's a special advisor to the Electronic Frontier Foundation, very renowned person involved in digital issues, digital policy. Cory, welcome. And I'll just straight ahead pass the floor to you to take over.
And well, it's my pleasure. What a treat to talk to you. I've spent many days in Geneva as a delegate at the World Intellectual Property Organization and UNCTAD and so on. And, you know, I have had much cause to reflect on these issues in the context of those intergovernmental organizations and these multilateral policy setting forums. And it seems to me that then as now, there is a fight that is really as old as science itself about what we should do about information security. So in the time before we had science as we understand it now, we had something that approximated science that we called alchemy. And the major difference between alchemy and science was not the core methodology. You would have a practitioner who would observe a phenomenon in the universe. They would hypothesize a causal relationship between those phenomena, and they would then devise an experiment to see whether or not that causal relationship was real. The big difference between alchemy and science is what they did next. Alchemists didn't tell anyone what they thought they'd learned. Scientists do. They publish their results where everyone, not just people who they like or who like them or who wish them well, can see what they've done, comment on what they've done, and rebut what they've done. And by limiting the critical feedback on their work to people who were inside their circle of confidentiality, alchemists excluded key information about what they thought their findings were. They were able to kid themselves in ways that turned out to be quite dramatic, because for 500 years, every alchemist discovered for themselves in the hardest way possible that you really shouldn't drink mercury. And the advent of publication and adversarial peer review and transparency created a moment we call the Enlightenment. And it's not the Enlightenment because everyone who participated in it was a good actor or participated in good faith. Quite the reverse. It's the Enlightenment because everyone, even people who you think have nothing to add, are allowed to look at what you've done. Now, there are many challenges to information security, and you've heard of about many of them. I just caught the tail end of that last panel, and we were hearing about some of the really important ones. But whatever problems we're having designing secure systems, opacity isn't helping. And this brings me back to WIPO and to other multilateral forums and to the firms who send delegations to them to argue for policy related to information security. At WIPO and at other forums, we have created obligations to secrecy and punishments for disclosure for third parties who want to investigate and modify existing technologies. For example, under the TRIPS and the WIPO Copyright Treaty, respectively of the WTO and of WIPO, nation states are obliged to enact laws that prohibit bypassing a technical protection measure, any kind of digital rights management. And what this means is that vendors can wrap any service or product they offer in a kind of one molecule thick layer of digital rights management, and then felonize anyone who reverse engineers it, discloses information about its defects, or remediates those defects by offering third-party aftermarket mods or reconfiguration tools or adaptations. And this has produced an environment in which firms can and do operate in an alchemic way, where they are under no obligation to allow third parties to see what they've done or disclose it publicly. And moreover, they have the power to use these laws to silence people who reverse engineer, disclose, and make available information about defects in their products. And this has real meaningful impacts because it presents an enormous temptation to firms. It's the twin temptation of designing products in ways that are adverse to their customers' interests, or making aftermarket modifications to those products that are adverse to their customers' interests, in the knowledge that those customers, and this is the second part of the temptation, cannot avail themselves of information about how those deliberately induced defects work or how to remediate them. So in the news just very recently, you have Newag Impulse, which is a major manufacturer, or Newag rather, which is a major manufacturer of locomotives, whose Impulse is a widely used locomotive system in the European Union, that has deliberately designed its system to sense whether it has been serviced by an unauthorized service depot. And if it determines that the rail operator has had the audacity to perform their own service rather than paying the original manufacturer to conduct that service, the railroad engine bricks itself. It simply disables itself until you pay a technician to come out. Now, they don't disclose any of this. The way that we know it is that researchers in Poland, who are signatories to the European Copyright Directive, whose Article 6 prohibits the kind of research they did, risked prosecution to present this research to the public so that rail operators around Europe and in all the other territories in which the Newag Impulse are used can find out about it. Now, we understand why Newag did it, right? It's a way to shake down rail operators for a little money for authorized service. But what they have done is introduced a mechanism into critical transportation and logistics infrastructure that allows third parties who can impersonate the manufacturer to the device, to the locomotive, to remotely disable it, right? They have put a self-destruct button onto that train, and then lawmakers have protected that self-destruct button with IP rules that make discovering it, disclosing it, or disabling it into a crime. This comes up over and over again. It was originally developed, as a penny anti-grift to help companies sell you the music that you bought on CD once again as a digital music file, and then again as another digital music file when that was disabled. But it has crept inexorably into every field of endeavor, because every executive has had the realization that once your tool is digital, if you skin it in enough IP, you can felonize investigation of it or modification of it. And that has caused them to put these deliberately introduced backdoors into it and to prohibit public disclosure and remediation of it. And so this comes up in the most dastardly way imaginable. Medtronic is the largest medical device manufacturer in the world. They are nominally a European company, having undertaken the largest tax inversion in world history, in which they merged with a much smaller company in Ireland, which allowed them to maintain the pretense that they were headquartered in Ireland and that all of their profits were realized in a state of untaxable grace somewhere over the Irish Sea. And because they are they are an Irish company, they have standing under Article 6 of the European Copyright Directive to punish people who reverse engineer their products and disclose unfavorable facts about them. And this led them to equip their ventilators, which are the best-selling ventilators in the world, with a digital rights management system to force hospital medical technicians to have Medtronic technicians oversee their repairs. So when a Medtronic ventilator breaks down and you swap a screen from a broken ventilator into a ventilator that works except for its display, that repair doesn't start working until a Medtronic technician comes to your hospital and types an unlock code into the keyboard. Reverse engineering that unlock code and producing a third-party tool that hospital medical technicians can use to type that unlock code themselves is a crime under Article 6 of the European Copyright Directive. Now, this was bad enough until the pandemic hit, but when lockdown hit, Medtronic technicians couldn't travel to hospitals to bless these independently undertaken acts of service, which meant that you had perfectly good ventilators that wouldn't work. The solution to that was for yet another Pole. It always seems to be Poles, I don't know why, another Pole who had previously been a Medtronic technician, to reverse engineer that unlock code facility and to breadboard his or her own solution for it, which they then housed in whatever cases they could source during lockdown, so that medical technicians at hospitals all over the world started getting mysterious packages, guitar pedals, clock radios, old lamps that were being used to house a tool that would allow them to finalize the repairs they were making to their own devices. Now, the argument here is that these firms don't want to kill their users. And so what they're doing is they're blocking the ham-fisted repairs of third parties that might someday cause their users to come to harm. And if we don't allow these firms to have a veto over inconvenient disclosure, inconvenient research, and inconvenient modification, that users will die or that their interests will be terminally compromised. But the fact is that these firms are not good proxies for their users' interests. They are neither competent nor benevolent enough to be entrusted with that veto. And to see another example from the headlines of this week, look at 23andMe, which it turns out has leaked millions of its users' genomes to hackers who are now dumping them on darknet sites. And, if you don't like the fact that your genome has been hacked and dumped to a darknet site, you've got a really easy mitigation. Just get a different genome. And if you can't do that, you're screwed. So 23andMe would argue, well, if we allow third parties to investigate and disclose defects in our information security protocols on our servers and backend, that could expose our users to the risk of being hacked and dumped. But it turns out that if you give 23andMe that veto, you also expose users to the risk of being hacked and dumped. 23andMe is the alchemist. They're drinking mercury. They're not telling anyone that they're doing it. And we just have to trust that they're wise custodians of this valuable information. So what do we need to do about this? We need to have a second enlightenment for information security practices. We need to immunize people who investigate services from all causes: tortious interference with contract, copyright theories that prohibit reverse engineering, spurious claims under cybersecurity law like the American Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, other laws that prohibit violating terms of service. We need to create defenses in law that give the security to third parties that allow them to undertake this investigation. Because what we know about Newag and Medtronic and John Deere tractors and other critical pieces of infrastructure represent disclosures that were made at enormous personal risk and enormous personal cost. And there are surely other disclosures that we don't find out about because the people involved, either personally or through their institutions and their general counsel, are not able to make those disclosures to us. And instead they make the disclosure to the vendor, if at all. And oftentimes the vendor gets that disclosure and says, actually, this isn't a bug. We're going to won't fix it. And if you tell anyone that we've done it, we're going to try and put you in prison. So we need to immunize researchers for investigating, for disclosing, and then this is critical, for mitigating. You should be allowed to publish firmware patches for a Medtronic ventilator, a Newag Impulse, a printer, because your printer is a Turing complete universal von Neumann machine. And the same facility that prevents you from investigating and modifying it so that you can't use your own third-party ink instead of the $10,000 per gallon ink that HP wants to sell you is a facility that malware vendors can use to take over your printer and use it as a foothold within your LAN to probe devices, find unpatched vulnerabilities, and open reverse shells to them. This is an actual proof of concept demo that Anqui did a decade ago called Print Me If You Dare, that started with the observation that for most major printer vendors, the way that you updated their firmware was to send a PostScript file to the printer, just a regular document, that had a line in it that was invisible to the user who printed the document that said, new firmware starts here. And the printer would unquestionably install all of that data afterwards. Qui was able to red team this and send documents with titles like cv.docx to HR departments of major corporations to take over their printers. He was also able to just locate unsecured print spools on the internet where he could just send invisible print files to those documents. So we need to immunize the manufacturer of third-party patches that repair these deliberately introduced vulnerabilities because they are so proliferate. This is not to say that all conduct in respect of discovered vulnerabilities or patching should be lawful, but rather that the lawfulness or the permissibility or the acceptability of this conduct should be determined by democratically elected lawmakers who undertake their deliberations in public, not by shareholder accountable executives who deliberate in boardrooms. They cannot be trusted to put their users or society's interests ahead of them. And thus far, governments have got it exactly wrong, and they've been getting it wrong for as long as I've been going to Geneva, which is now more than 2 decades. And instead of encouraging disclosure and immunizing disclosure, they themselves have security services who are researching these commonly used devices to discover vulnerabilities in them and hoard them and weaponize them on the theory that they are so smart that the vulnerabilities they discover can never be independently rediscovered by bad guys and used against the populations who pay their salaries and whom they're supposed to be protecting, and that they themselves will never leak them. Both of these turn out to be invalid assumptions. When we had the CIA cyber weapon breach, we were able to see that the rate of independent rediscovery of vulnerabilities that had been hoarded by the CIA and weaponized was about 1 in 5 per annum. So every year there was a 20% chance that one of these defects that the CIA knew about but decided not to tell the vendor about or warn its public about, that would be independently rediscovered and weaponized either by petty crooks or other nation states. And we also know from those leaks that those leaks the CIA is just as capable of leaking its cyber weapons as are other state actors of leaking their cyber weapons. And when those cyber weapons leak, they fall into the hands not merely of powerful threat actors, but just fools, dum-dums, petty crooks. The ransomware epidemic that we are living through now, in which you have, yes, some big sophisticated cybercrime gangs, but also just children who are seeking a couple $100 to give you back your data. That ransomware epidemic starts with the leak of a Windows 0 day that the NSA had hoarded, that they codenamed Eternal Blue. And when that leaked, these petty crooks were able to fuse that with existing ransomware and use it as the vector for this payload that locked up your files and came after you. So we are long overdue, you know, here 2.5 decades into the commercial internet, long overdue for this second enlightenment. There are plenty of more sophisticated problems we're going to have. You know, the question of how you investigate, what you do once you've investigated, what the best practice is to avoid the vulnerabilities you discover when you investigate, those are really good, chewy problems that we should all be researching. But we have not cleared this foundation of permitting hostile, adversarial, third parties who do not like the company, want to humiliate, embarrass them, the same professional rivals that went after major researchers in the first enlightenment, to permit them to continue to do their work, even if they have unclean hands, even if they have unclean motivations, to go ahead and make those disclosures and subject those disclosures to democratically accountable regulation, not to a corporate veto. And I think that we could do worse from starting there. You know, when Joe Louis, the boxer, who had been fighting for Black liberation against the American government and Jim Crow, signed up to fight in World War II as a volunteer, someone said, "Why are you signing up to fight on America's side when you were adverse to them in so many other domains?" And he said, "There's plenty wrong with this world, but Hitler's not helping." Right? There is plenty wrong with our information security practice. People are still getting zinged on untyped variables and buffer overruns and hard-coded cryptographic keys and source code they upload to GitHub. But a prohibition on disclosure isn't helping. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Cory, for joining us. I know it's quite early back there. You gave us some food for thought. This will be a great end of our event. And Cory will certainly keep you updated on what's happening on the Geneva Dialogue side. I think the part on the role of researchers, we've touched upon that this morning. We've heard a great story from Juan Pablo and Charisma on how they actually work with the governments and with the international processes as researchers. And I think one of the cards that we played today was also about protecting the researchers. There was that missing card that we might also sue them, right? But we decided not to play that. So this is a great stimulation for us to think about the next steps. With that, I just want to thank you again for being with us, not only today, but many of you have been with us for years now, to draft the manual and to make this first big step. And by the way, when we started the Geneva Dialogue 5 years ago, well, let's say the last phase, just before COVID, the idea was to start with the event like that. And everything was planned, and then the COVID started. So this is actually the first event that we organized after these couple of years where we could get together. And it's a pleasure to meet some of you finally in person. We'll close the day with this. I'll once again like to thank the Swiss Federal Department of Foreign Affairs, Ambassador Wechsler, Serge, thank you for all the support. Canton and of Geneva, EPFL, Center for Digital Trust, UBS, and Swisscom for all the support, and my colleague Nastya for all this great work